Adrian Cole thought power meant never needing anyone. He was wrong. At 35, he'd built an empire from spreadsheets and 70-hour weeks, convinced that success could fill the hollow space where connection should be. Then Ryan Blake stayed late one Thursday, and everything Adrian had carefully constructed began to crack. What started as a conversation about quarterly projections became the moment Adrian's loneliness finally had a witness, and the single father with paint-stained fingers and a daughter waiting at home became the one person who could see through the glass walls Adrian had spent a decade building. This is their story, messy, imperfect, and entirely human. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're ready for something real, hit that like button and stick around until the end. You won't regret it. The city looked different at night from the 42nd floor. Adrian Cole stood at his office window, one hand pressed against the glass, watching the traffic lights below pulse through their cycles. Red, green, yellow. Stop. Go. Wait. Simple instructions for people whose lives made sense. His phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. He didn't look at it. The office behind him was exactly what you'd expect from a CEO who'd built Cole Technologies from a garage startup to a Fortune 500 company in 8 years. Minimalist furniture. Awards nobody cared about gathering dust on floating shelves. A coffee maker that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And he still couldn't remember the last time he'd actually tasted what it made. It was Thursday, 9:47 p.m. The building should have been empty, but when Adrian finally turned from the window, he saw light bleeding from under the door of the development lab 3 floors down, visible through the glass partition that separated his executive suite from the rest of the floor. Someone was still here. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair, more habit than necessity, and headed for the elevator. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, each one a small percussion against marble that had cost a fortune and felt like walking on ice. The development lab occupied the entire 39th floor. Adrian swiped his badge, and the doors whispered open onto a landscape of monitors and standing desks, mechanical keyboards, and empty energy drink cans. The overhead lights were off, but the glow from a single workstation near the windows lit up the face of Ryan Blake. Ryan didn't look up when Adrian approached. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of steady rhythm that suggested he'd been at this for hours. There was a smudge of something, ink, paint, on his right forearm, and his hair stuck up at odd angles like he'd been running his hands through it. "You know we have a building security policy about working past 9, Adrian said. Ryan's hands stilled. He looked up, and for half a second, Adrian saw genuine surprise cross his face before it settled into something more guarded. "Mr. Cole, I didn't realize you were still here. That makes 2 of us." Adrian moved closer, trying to see what was on the screen. Lines of code dense and incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't spent years learning to read it. "What are you working on?" "The Henderson Project." Ryan sat back, rolling his shoulders like they ached. "There's a memory leak I can't pin down. Keeps crashing the application after about 6 hours of continuous use. Henderson's not due for review until next month." "I know." Ryan reached for a coffee cup that was probably cold by now. He took a sip anyway and grimaced. "Just wanted to get ahead of it." Adrian studied him. Ryan Blake had been with Cole Technologies for 3 years, working his way up from junior developer to team lead through what Adrian's VP of engineering called quiet competence. He didn't make a lot of noise, didn't politic for promotions, just did the work and did it well. Adrian had probably spoken to him directly maybe 5 times before tonight. "You have a daughter, right?" Adrian asked. Ryan's expression shifted, still guarded, but warmer somehow. "Chloe, she's 6. "Shouldn't you be home with her?" "She's at my sister's tonight. Thursday is her sleepover with her cousin." Ryan's fingers drummed against his desk, a nervous gesture he seemed unaware of. "Figured I'd use the quiet time." Adrian nodded. He understood that impulse, the need to fill silence with productivity before it filled itself with thoughts you didn't want to have. "You want company?" The question was out before Adrian could think better of it. Ryan blinked. "Sir?" "I'm not going home anytime soon either. Might as well be useless somewhere other than my office." Adrian pulled over a nearby chair and sat down before Ryan could formulate a polite refusal.
Talk me through it. The memory leak. For a moment, Ryan just stared at him like he'd started speaking Mandarin. Then something in his expression loosened, and he turned back to his screen. Okay? So the issue is in how the application handles session data. They worked for an hour, then 2. Ryan explained the problem in terms Adrian could mostly follow, and Adrian asked questions that were probably stupid, but Ryan answered anyway without making him feel like an idiot. At some point, Adrian shrugged out of his jacket. At some point after that, Ryan's wariness began to fade. Wait, Adrian said, leaning closer to the screen. Go back. That function there? Isn't that being called every time someone clicks a button? Ryan scrolled up, squinting. Yeah, it refreshes the user session token. And how often do users click buttons? Constantly. Ryan went very still. Oh hell. That's your leak. That's my leak. Ryan was already typing, fingers flying. Every click creates a new token, but doesn't clear the old one. After 6 hours of normal use, you'd have thousands of orphan tokens just sitting in memory. So fix it. It's not that simple. If I change how the tokens are generated, I might break authentication across the entire platform. Then don't change how they're generated. Change when they're cleared. Ryan stopped typing. He looked at Adrian, really looked at him, and Adrian felt something uncomfortable shift in his chest under that gaze. That could work, Ryan said slowly. Then try it. Ryan did. It took another 40 minutes of careful coding, testing, cursing under his breath when something didn't work. And then, got it. Ryan's face split into a grin that transformed him from tired and rumpled to something that made Adrian's breath catch. It's running clean, no leak. Good. Good? That's... Ryan laughed, the sound surprised out of him. Mr. Cole, you just saved me probably 2 weeks of troubleshooting. Adrian, he said before he could stop himself. When it's past midnight and we're debugging memory leaks together, you can call me Adrian. Something flickered across Ryan's face. Uncertainty, maybe, or curiosity. Okay, Adrian. The name sounded different in Ryan's voice, less like a title and more like something personal. They sat there in the blue glow of the monitor, the city sprawled out below them through the windows, and Adrian realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt useful for something other than signing checks or approving budgets. Can I ask you something? Ryan said after a moment. Sure. Why are you really still here? It's almost 1 a.m. Adrian could have deflected, should have deflected. Instead, he found himself saying, because my apartment is empty, and sometimes the office feels less so. Ryan's expression did something complicated. Yeah, I get that. Do you? Why do you think I'm debugging code at 10 p.m. on a Thursday when my daughter's not home? Ryan's smile was small and sad. Chloe's my whole world, but when she's not there, the quiet is loud, Adrian finished. Exactly. They looked at each other, and Adrian felt the ground shift beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with the building's foundation. Here was someone who understood, who knew what it meant to be surrounded by everything you'd built and still feel fundamentally alone. It was dangerous, this recognition. Adrian had spent years making sure he never let anyone close enough to see the hollow spaces in him. But Ryan was looking at him like he already saw them, and instead of the exposure feeling threatening, it felt almost like relief. I should go, Ryan said, but he didn't move. Yeah, Adrian agreed. Me too. Neither of them stood. My late partner, Ryan said suddenly, his voice careful. Daniel. He died 4 years ago. Cancer. It was fast, 8 months from diagnosis to... He stopped, swallowed. Everyone tells you it gets easier, that time heals, and maybe it does, I don't know. But the quiet never stops being loud. Adrian's chest constricted. He didn't talk about his own past, had made it a policy never to discuss the before times with anyone who worked for him, but something about the trust Ryan was offering demanded reciprocation. I had lymphoma, Adrian said. 7 years ago. I was 28 and running a startup, and suddenly I was in treatment, and then I was in remission, and then I was supposed to go back to normal, except nothing was normal anymore. Ryan waited. Didn't push. Just gave Adrian space to continue or not.
The treatment saved my life, Adrian went on, the words coming easier than they should. But it also, I can't have kids. And there were other complications. Nerve damage, mostly. My hands, he held them up, and in the monitor light, you could just barely see the tremor that was always there, the one he'd learned to hide. They don't work the way they used to. I'm sorry, Ryan said quietly. Don't be. I'm alive. That's more than a lot of people get. But you're alone. The observation landed like a punch. Adrian let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had contained any humor. Yeah, I'm alone. By choice? By necessity. Adrian stood, suddenly needing distance. I'm your boss, Ryan. There's a power dynamic here that makes anything other than professional interaction ethically questionable at best. Ryan stood too, and Adrian noticed for the first time that they were almost exactly the same height. I wasn't suggesting anything. Weren't you? No, I was just... Ryan ran a hand through his already messy hair, making it worse. I was just acknowledging that I see you, that's all. You're not as invisible as you think you are. Adrian's throat felt tight. I should go. Adrian? Good night, Ryan. He made it to the elevator before his composure cracked. Stood there with his hand pressed against the cold metal wall, breathing carefully, until the doors opened and he could escape into the empty car. The ride down 42 floors had never felt so long. Over the next 3 weeks, Adrian told himself he was not seeking Ryan out. He just happened to work late more often. Happened to stop by the development lab when he knew Ryan's team would be there. Happened to notice when Ryan stayed past 9 and happened to bring coffee, the good kind from the cafe 3 blocks over, not the sludge from the break room, and happened to pull up a chair and ask about whatever project Ryan was working on. They talked about code, mostly, about the Henderson project and the new security protocols, and whether the company should pivot toward AI integration or stick with their core infrastructure business. Safe topics, professional topics, except somewhere between discussing database architecture and debating the merits of different development frameworks, the conversation started including other things. Ryan talked about Chloe, how she'd decided she wanted to be a paleontologist this week, which was a change from last week's ambition to be a professional ice cream taster, how she'd lost her first tooth and been more fascinated by the blood than scared, how she'd asked him last Sunday why she didn't have a mommy like the other kids, and Ryan had tried to explain that families came in different shapes, but 6-year-olds didn't really do nuance. Adrian found himself talking, too, about things he normally kept locked away, about how his company had been his whole life for so long that he'd forgotten how to want anything else, about the strange guilt that came with surviving when so many others didn't, about how he'd built an empire but couldn't figure out how to build a connection. You're doing it right now, Ryan pointed out one night. They were in the lab again, well past midnight, surrounded by the detritus of another long evening, empty takeout containers and coffee cups, and Ryan's jacket draped over a chair. Doing what? Building a connection. Ryan's smile was soft in the blue monitor glow. You're just too stubborn to notice. Adrian wanted to argue, but the evidence was literally sitting across from him, smiling like Adrian was someone worth knowing. It was terrifying. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. One Tuesday, Adrian found himself checking his watch at 8 p.m., not because he was tracking productivity metrics, but because he knew Ryan usually took his dinner break around then. One Wednesday, he caught himself smiling at nothing because Ryan had sent him a meme about debugging that was actually funny. One Thursday, he looked up from a board meeting to find Ryan passing by in the hallway outside, and the improvement in his mood was immediate and undeniable. He was in trouble. You're different lately, his VP of Operations noted during a budget review. Less what? Adrian asked, not looking up from the spreadsheet. I don't know. Severe? You smiled at Johnson's terrible joke in the last meeting. The old you would have just stared at him until he stopped talking. Maybe I'm mellowing in my old age. You're 35. Ancient, Adrian deadpanned. But she was right. He was different. Lighter, somehow, like a weight he'd been carrying for years had been partially lifted, and he knew exactly when it had happened and who was responsible. The problem was that acknowledging it meant doing something about it, and doing something about it was impossible. Ryan worked for him, reported directly to his VP of Engineering, who reported to Adrian. Any relationship between them would be immediately scrutinized, immediately suspect. People would assume Ryan had slept his way to advancement, or that Adrian was abusing his position, or both. Adrian had spent too long building his reputation to torch it for something that probably wouldn't last anyway. Except he couldn't stop thinking about the way Ryan's eyes crinkled when he laughed. Couldn't stop remembering the comfortable silence that had developed between them, the kind where neither of them felt compelled to fill every gap with words. Couldn't stop wanting more of those late-night conversations, more of Ryan's quiet competence and unexpected humor, and the way he seemed to see straight through Adrian's carefully constructed walls. He was definitely in trouble. The situation came to a head on a Friday afternoon in March. Adrian was supposed to be in meetings all day, budget planning, strategic reviews, the kind of executive nonsense that filled calendars and accomplished very little. But his last meeting had ended early, and he found himself walking toward the development lab without consciously deciding to. The floor was busy, multiple teams working on their respective projects. Adrian spotted Ryan immediately, standing at a whiteboard with two other developers, gesturing at a diagram that looked like a cross between a flowchart and abstract art. If we restructure the database queries, Ryan was saying, marker in hand, we can reduce the load time by at least 40%, but it means rewriting the entire back-end architecture. That's months of work, one of the other developers said. Sure, but it's months of work now or years of technical debt later. Take your pick. Adrian leaned against the wall, content to watch. Ryan in his element was something else, confident without arrogance, clear in his explanations, willing to listen when others pushed back but firm in his convictions. He'd shed his suit jacket somewhere, rolled his sleeves up to his elbows, and there was that paint smudge again on his forearm. Adrian wondered if Ryan even knew it was there. Ryan turned to write something else on the whiteboard and caught sight of Adrian. His expression brightened immediately, unconsciously, and Adrian felt that shift in his chest again. Mr. Cole, Ryan said, and Adrian knew he was using the formal address for the benefit of the others. Did you need something? Just passing through, don't let me interrupt. But the other developers were already straightening, suddenly self-conscious with the CEO present. They made excuses and scattered, leaving Ryan alone at the whiteboard, marker still in hand. You scared them off, Ryan said. I have that effect. Not on everyone. Ryan capped the marker, set it down. Were you actually just passing through, or was there something you needed? Adrian should have said yes, made up some business reason for being there. Instead, he said, I wanted to see you. The honesty landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Ryan's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Adrian to track: surprise, pleasure, uncertainty, and something that might have been resignation. Adrian, I know. Trust me. I know. Adrian shoved his hands in his pockets to hide the tremor that always got worse when he was stressed. This is a bad idea. You work for me. There are policies and ethics and 100 good reasons why I should turn around and walk away right now. But you're not walking away. No, I'm not. Adrian took a breath. Next week I have to go to Seattle for a conference. 3 days of panels and networking and pretending to care about synergy and market disruption. I hate it. But there's a dinner on the second night that I'm required to attend, and I'm allowed to bring a guest. Ryan was very still. What are you asking? Come with me. To Seattle. Adrian forced himself to meet Ryan's eyes. I'll tell everyone you're there to discuss a potential partnership. It'll be completely above board, professionally speaking. But between us, it's a chance to see if this thing I can't stop thinking about is real or just loneliness making me stupid. And if it's real, then we figure it out, together. And if it's loneliness, then at least we'll know. Ryan looked at him for a long moment. Adrian watched him think, watched the careful consideration that went into every decision Ryan made. He was a father first, always, which meant he didn't take risks lightly, didn't jump without looking, didn't let himself want things that could hurt the life he'd built for his daughter. Adrian was asking him to want something anyway. Okay, Ryan said finally. Okay? Yeah, okay. Ryan's smile was small but genuine. I'll come to Seattle. But I need to find someone to watch Chloe, and it can't be my sister because she's going out of town, so bring her. Ryan blinked. What? Bring Chloe to Seattle. The idea solidified as Adrian said it.
Book her on the same flight, same hotel. We'll get her a separate room with a connecting door. During the day, while I'm in conference sessions, you two can explore the city. At night, we'll get a babysitter for the dinner, and then we figure it out," Ryan finished. "Yeah." Ryan was looking at him like he'd just solved an impossible equation. "You'd really be okay with that? With Chloe coming?" "Ryan, if this is going to be anything, she has to be part of it. I understand that." Something shifted in Ryan's expression, some final wall coming down. "Okay, yes, we'll come to Seattle." Adrian let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Okay." "Okay," Ryan echoed, and they stood there grinning at each other like idiots until someone walked by and they had to pretend they were discussing work. But Adrian's heart was pounding, and his hands were shaking worse than usual, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt like maybe the hollow spaces inside him could be filled with something other than accomplishment. Maybe they could be filled with connection. With Ryan. With the possibility of something that terrified him precisely because it mattered. He was definitely in trouble. The best kind. Seattle was rain-soaked and beautiful, the kind of city that wore its weather like a comfortable old coat. Adrian stood at the window of his hotel room on the 34th floor, watching the drops streak down the glass and blur the Space Needle in the distance. Behind him, his laptop sat open on the desk, ignored. The conference didn't start until tomorrow morning. Tonight, he was supposed to be reviewing his panel notes and preparing for the networking dinners that would dominate the next 3 days. Instead, he was thinking about the room 2 doors down, where Ryan was presumably getting Chloe settled in. His phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "She wants to know if you like pizza." Adrian smiled and typed back. "Is that even a question?" "Good. We're ordering. Room 3412. Come eat with us?" Adrian looked at his laptop, at the work he should be doing. Then he grabbed his key card and headed for the door. Room 3412 was identical to his own: king bed, desk, bathroom, view of the city. But it felt entirely different because Ryan was there, barefoot in jeans and a t-shirt, and there was a little girl with dark curls bouncing on the bed. "You must be Chloe," Adrian said from the doorway. She stopped bouncing and regarded him with solemn brown eyes. "Are you Mr. Cole?" "I am, but you can call me Adrian." "Daddy says you're his boss." "I am that too." "Are you nice?" "Chloe," Ryan said, but he was suppressing a smile. "It's okay." Adrian came into the room properly and sat in the desk chair, putting himself at Chloe's eye level. "That's a fair question. I try to be nice, but you'll have to decide for yourself if I succeed." Chloe considered this. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I think they're pretty cool." "What's your favorite?" "Probably the pterodactyl." Chloe's nose wrinkled. "That's not a dinosaur. It's a flying reptile." Adrian glanced at Ryan, who shrugged with an expression that clearly said, "I told you she was into this." "You're absolutely right," Adrian told Chloe. "I stand corrected. In that case, I'll go with Triceratops." "Good choice. They had really strong frills for protection and could fight off T-Rexes even though T-Rexes were bigger." Chloe flopped down on the bed, kicking her feet. "Daddy says we're in Seattle because you have to work, but we get to explore. Can we go to the Space Needle?" "Absolutely, and the aquarium, if you want." "They have otters there. I love otters." "Then otters it is." The pizza arrived 20 minutes later, 2 large pies that were definitely too much food for 3 people. They ate sitting on the floor because Chloe insisted it was more fun that way, and Adrian found himself telling terrible jokes just to hear her laugh. Ryan watched them with an expression Adrian couldn't quite read. Soft, maybe. Hopeful. After Chloe had eaten herself into a food coma and was sprawled on the bed watching a nature documentary about marine mammals, Ryan walked Adrian to the door. "Thank you," Ryan said quietly. "For what?" "For being good with her, for not making this weird." "Why would I make it weird?" "Because most people do. When they find out I'm a single dad, they either get uncomfortable or they go too far the other way and treat me like I'm made of glass." Ryan leaned against the door frame. "You're just normal. It's nice." Adrian wanted to say something profound, something that would convey how much this evening had meant to him. How right it felt to be here, sharing space with Ryan and his daughter,
like pieces of his life clicking into place in ways he'd never expected. Instead, he said, "See you tomorrow?" "Yeah, tomorrow." Ryan's hand brushed against Adrian's as he said goodnight, a brief contact that sent electricity up Adrian's arm. Their eyes met, and Adrian saw his own want reflected back at him. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The conference was exactly as boring as Adrian had anticipated. He sat through panels on digital transformation and emerging markets, nodded through presentations on disruptive technologies and scalable solutions, and shook hands with approximately 300 people whose names he would forget within the hour. What he couldn't forget was the text he'd gotten from Ryan during the lunch break. "Chloe found a tide pool and won't leave. Send help. Or snacks. Preferably both." Adrian had smiled at his phone like a teenager, then realized 3 of his fellow panelists were staring at him. "Good news?" one of them had asked. "Yeah," Adrian had said. "The best." Now it was evening, and he was getting ready for the dinner he'd been dreading. Black tie, which meant the full monkey suit and the shoes that looked great but felt like instruments of torture. He'd been to dozens of these events, and they all followed the same script. Forced conversation, mediocre food, speeches that went on too long, and a general atmosphere of aggressive networking disguised as collegiality. But tonight was different because Ryan would be there. He'd sent Ryan a text an hour ago confirming the babysitter had arrived, someone from the hotel's childcare service, thoroughly vetted and background checked. Ryan had responded with a thumbs up and a note that Chloe was already trying to teach the babysitter about marine biology. Adrian was adjusting his bow tie for the 3rd time when someone knocked on his door. Ryan stood in the hallway in a suit that fit him perfectly, his hair actually cooperating for once, and Adrian forgot how to breathe. "Too much?" Ryan asked, self-conscious under Adrian's stare. "No, perfect." "You look—" Adrian stopped, gathered himself. "Perfect." Ryan's smile was worth every terrible panel Adrian had sat through today. "You clean up pretty well yourself, boss." "Don't call me that tonight." "What should I call you?" "Adrian? Just Adrian." "Okay, just Adrian. Ready to go pretend we're interested in market disruption?" Adrian laughed and grabbed his key card. "Let's get this over with." The dinner was held in one of the hotel's ballrooms, all crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, and enough silverware to confuse anyone who hadn't grown up learning which fork to use when. Adrian and Ryan found their assigned table and settled in among 6 other tech executives, all of whom immediately began the usual dance of establishing pecking order. Adrian had done this enough times to know his role. He was young for a CEO, successful enough to be respected, but not so successful that he threatened the egos at the table. He could talk shop with the best of them, trade war stories about failed launches and difficult boards, and generally fade into the background of these events. But tonight, he didn't want to fade into anything. He wanted to be present, here, with Ryan beside him. "So, how do you two know each other?" the woman on Adrian's left asked during the appetizer course. She was the CFO of some social media company, her name already forgotten. "Ryan leads one of our development teams," Adrian said smoothly. "He's here to discuss a potential partnership we're exploring." It wasn't entirely a lie. They were exploring something, even if it had nothing to do with business. "And how are you finding the conference?" she asked Ryan. "Educational," Ryan said, which was diplomatic code for boring. "Though I've spent most of the day exploring the city with my daughter, so I can't claim to have attended many sessions." "You brought your daughter?" Another executive, this one from a cybersecurity firm, looked scandalized. "I did. She's 6 and obsessed with marine life, so Seattle seemed like a good opportunity for both of us." "That's—" the man struggled for words. "Unusual." "Maybe," Ryan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But she's my priority. Work comes second." Adrian felt a rush of pride that was probably inappropriate given the setting. Here was Ryan, refusing to apologize for being a parent first, not caring what these people thought of him because their opinions didn't matter compared to what was best for Chloe. The conversation moved on to safer topics: stock prices, acquisition rumors, who was hiring and who was laying off. Adrian participated enough to be polite, but his attention kept drifting to Ryan. The way he held his wine glass but barely drank from it. The way he answered questions with careful precision, never giving more information than necessary. The way his knee pressed against Adrian's under the table, a point of contact that felt deliberate. Halfway through the main course, Adrian's phone buzzed. He normally wouldn't check it during dinner, but something made him glance at the screen. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Sarah from Hotel Childcare. Chloe is fine, but she's asking for her dad. Nothing urgent, but wanted to give you a heads up." Adrian showed the message to Ryan, who immediately stood. "I'm sorry. I need to—" Ryan started. "Go," Adrian said. "I'll make excuses." But Ryan hesitated. "Come with me?" "What?" "Come with me. Please. I want—" Ryan stopped, started again. "I want you there." Adrian should have stayed, should have maintained appearances, worked the room, done all the things a CEO was supposed to do at these events. Instead, he stood, dropped his napkin on the table, and said, "Excuse us. Minor emergency." They made it to the elevator before either of them spoke. "I'm sorry," Ryan said. "I know this dinner was important." "It wasn't. Not compared to this." "To what?" Adrian looked at him, at this man who'd somehow become essential in the space of 3 weeks in a cross-country flight. "To you, to Chloe, to whatever this is we're trying to figure out." The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside, alone for the first time all evening. "Adrian?" Ryan said softly. "Yeah?" "I think I'm already figured out." Adrian's heart stuttered. "Yeah?" "Yeah. I just needed to know you were too." The elevator climbed toward the 34th floor. Adrian's hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. Every instinct he'd developed over 7 years of careful isolation was screaming at him to run, to retreat, to protect himself before this could hurt him. But Ryan was looking at him with open honesty, with want tempered by patience, and Adrian was so tired of running. "I'm figured out," he said. The doors opened. They walked together toward Chloe's room, toward whatever came next, and Adrian felt like he was stepping off a cliff into freefall. But Ryan's hand found his in the hallway, squeezed once, and Adrian thought maybe falling didn't have to mean crashing. Maybe it could mean flying. Chloe was sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed when they arrived, her babysitter Sarah reading to her from a book about octopuses. The moment she saw Ryan, her face crumpled. "Daddy, I had a bad dream, and you weren't here." Ryan was across the room in 3 strides, gathering her into his arms. "I'm here now, sweetheart. I'm right here." Adrian stood by the door, suddenly feeling like an intruder. This was a private moment, the kind of intimacy between parent and child that he had no business witnessing. But when he moved to leave, Chloe's voice stopped him. "Adrian stayed too?" He turned back. Chloe was peeking over Ryan's shoulder, her eyes red but curious. "I did," Adrian said carefully. "Is that okay?" She nodded and buried her face back in Ryan's neck. Sarah gathered her things quietly, and Adrian walked her to the door, slipping her an extra 100 for the trouble. When he turned back, Ryan was sitting on the bed with Chloe in his lap, murmuring something Adrian couldn't hear. "You don't have to stay," Ryan said, but there was hope in his voice that contradicted the words. Adrian sat down in the desk chair, the same one he'd occupied during pizza 2 nights ago. "Tell me about the dream, Chloe." She lifted her head, considering whether she trusted him enough. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she said, "I was swimming with the otters, but then the water got really deep, and I couldn't find Daddy anywhere." "That sounds scary." "It was. Everything was dark, and I kept calling for him, but nobody answered." Ryan's arms tightened around her. "I'm sorry, baby. That must have been really frightening." "But you came back," Chloe said, her voice small. "You always come back." "Always, but," Ryan promised. Adrian watched them, something in his chest aching. He'd spent so long convinced that this kind of connection was beyond him, that the damage from his treatment had stolen not just his fertility, but his capacity for family. Yet here he was, sitting in a hotel room in Seattle, watching a father comfort his daughter, and feeling like maybe he could belong in this picture after all. "Can Adrian read to me?" Chloe asked suddenly. Ryan's eyes found Adrian's across the room. "If he wants to." Adrian had never read to a child before, had never even held a baby. But he crossed to the bed and accepted the octopus book from Sarah's abandoned spot, settling in next to Ryan while Chloe nestled between them. The book was surprisingly detailed for a children's story, full of facts about cephalopod intelligence and camouflage capabilities. Adrian read slowly, stumbling over some of the longer scientific names, but Chloe didn't seem to mind. She interrupted every few sentences with her own observations, her exhaustion making her chattier than usual. "Did you know octopuses have 3 hearts?" she informed him seriously. "I did not know that. And they can change colors in less than a second. That's faster than you can blink." "That's pretty impressive." "Daddy says I talk too much about ocean animals." "I said you could talk about them as much as you want," Ryan corrected gently. "I just also said that sometimes other people might want to talk about other things." "Do you want to talk about other things?" Chloe asked Adrian. "Not particularly. I'm learning a lot about octopuses." She beamed at him, and Adrian felt something shift in his chest. This child, who had known him for all of 48 hours, was looking at him like he'd just given her the greatest gift. All he'd done was sit down and read a book, but apparently that was enough. By the time they finished the story, Chloe's eyes were drooping. Ryan carried her to the connecting room, tucking her into the bed while Adrian waited, unsure whether he should leave or stay. But Ryan returned a few minutes later, closing the connecting door most of the way, and dropped onto the bed with a heavy exhale. "Sorry about the dinner," he said. "Don't be. Those things are torture anyway. Still, you were networking, doing the CEO thing, and I pulled you away because my kid had a nightmare." Adrian sat down next to him, their shoulders almost touching. "Ryan, I left because I wanted to, because being here felt more important than any conversation I was going to have down there. Even though we spent the last hour reading about octopuses? Especially because of that." Ryan turned his head, and they were close enough that Adrian could count the flecks of gold in his eyes. "You're good with her." "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I, most of the time. But you're good with her anyway." Ryan's hand found Adrian's on the bedspread, fingers tangling together. "That matters to me. More than you probably realize." Adrian looked down at their joined hands. His were trembling slightly. They always did when he was tired or stressed. But Ryan didn't seem to notice or care. "I meant what I said in the elevator. I'm figured out." "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means I'm tired of being alone. It means when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it's like to rebuild your life from wreckage. It means I like who I am when I'm around you and Chloe, and I haven't liked who I am in a very long time." Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Daniel died on a Tuesday. Chloe was 2, and I was 28, and suddenly I was a single father with a mortgage and a full-time job and a daughter who kept asking when Papa was coming home." His voice was steady but sad. "Everyone had advice. Move on. Find someone new. Don't wallow in grief. Like there was a timeline for how long you were allowed to miss someone." "Is there?" Adrian asked softly. "No. You miss them until you don't, and sometimes that's forever, and that's okay." Ryan's thumb traced circles on the back of Adrian's hand. "But I've learned there's a difference between missing someone and being stuck in the past. I'm not stuck anymore. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Even if it's complicated? Especially if it's complicated. Easy things aren't usually worth having." Adrian wanted to kiss him, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him. This need to close the distance between them and prove that this was real. But Chloe was sleeping 10 feet away, and this moment felt too important to rush. Instead, he said, "When we get back to the office, we're going to have to figure out the logistics. I'm your boss. That's not going to change overnight." "I know. HR is going to have opinions, so is the board. And if we do this, really do this, there will be people who assume you're sleeping your way up the corporate ladder. Let them assume whatever they want." Ryan's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm good at my job. My work speaks for itself." "It does, but that won't stop people from talking." "Then we'll deal with it. Together." Ryan squeezed his hand. "Unless you're having second thoughts?" Adrian shook his head. "No second thoughts. Just trying to be realistic about what we're walking into." "Okay, then let's be realistic." Ryan shifted to face him fully. "You're the CEO. I'm a team lead. There's a power imbalance that we can't ignore, so we don't. We document everything. We keep things professional at work, and we make sure that my career advancement has nothing to do with our relationship. And if people don't believe that, then they don't. But we'll know the truth, and that's what matters." Adrian studied him, This man who refused to make himself smaller to fit other people's expectations. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since you asked me to come to Seattle. Ryan's smile was crooked. I'm a planner, Adrian. I don't jump into things without considering the consequences. And the consequences are worth it? Yeah, they are. This time when Adrian leaned in, Ryan met him halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. Ryan's hand came up to cup Adrian's jaw, and Adrian let himself fall into the moment, into the gentle pressure of Ryan's lips and the smell of his cologne and the rightness of being here, like this, with someone who saw all of him and wanted him anyway. When they pulled apart, Ryan's eyes were bright. I've wanted to do that for 3 weeks. Only 3 weeks? I've wanted to do that since you corrected my terrible debugging suggestion and made me feel useful for the first time in years. That was 3 weeks ago. Exactly. Ryan laughed, the sound low and warm, and Adrian thought he could get used to being the reason for that laugh. Could get used to these quiet moments where the world narrowed down to just the two of them and everything else faded into background noise. They talked until nearly 2 in the morning, sprawled across Ryan's hotel bed, hands linked between them. They talked about everything and nothing. Adrian's plans for the company, Ryan's concerns about Chloe starting first grade in the fall, their mutual hatred of corporate jargon, their favorite bad movies. It was easy in a way Adrian hadn't experienced before, this comfort of being known. When Adrian finally dragged himself back to his own room, he felt lighter than he had in years. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd found something worth the risk. The last day of the conference was a blur. Adrian sat through his final panel discussion, shook the requisite number of hands, and collected business cards he'd never look at again. His mind was elsewhere, already planning the conversation he'd need to have with HR when they got back, the policies they'd need to review, the careful navigation of dating someone who technically reported to him. But every time the logistics threatened to overwhelm him, he'd get a text from Ryan. Pictures of Chloe at the aquarium, her face pressed against the glass of the otter exhibit. A video of her explaining tidal patterns to a bemused security guard. A simple message that just said "miss you" with no punctuation, like Ryan had sent it without thinking and then committed to it. Adrian saved every single one. They met for dinner at a restaurant near the waterfront, Chloe between them in a booth that overlooked the sound. She was still buzzing from the aquarium, talking a mile a minute about the things she'd seen. And there was this really big fish, Daddy, like bigger than our car, and it swam right over my head, and I could see its belly, and it was so cool. Sounds like you had a good day, Adrian said. The best day. We saw jellyfish that glowed and a shark that had a whole bunch of babies, and there was a touch tank where you could pet raise, but I didn't want to because what if I hurt them by accident? That's very thoughtful of you. She nodded seriously, then stole a French fry from Ryan's plate. Daddy says we're going home tomorrow. We are, Ryan confirmed. I don't want to go home. I like it here. We'll come back and visit sometime, Ryan promised. Can Adrian come? Ryan glanced at Adrian, a question in his eyes. Adrian nodded, and Ryan smiled. Yeah, sweetheart, Adrian can come. Good, because he's my friend now, and friends do things together. Adrian's throat felt tight. He'd been called a lot of things in his life, boss, CEO, survivor, difficult, but friend was new, especially from a 6-year-old who had no ulterior motives, who liked him simply because he'd read her a book and didn't mind listening to facts about marine biology. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront despite the drizzle. Chloe ran ahead, jumping in puddles, while Adrian and Ryan followed at a slower pace. Their hands bumped together, and after the 3rd time, Ryan just took Adrian's hand and held it. This okay? Ryan asked. Yeah, it's okay. They walked in comfortable silence, watching Chloe's joy, and Adrian tried to remember the last time he'd felt this content. Couldn't. Maybe he never had. Maybe this was new, this sense of belonging to something bigger than himself, of being part of a unit instead of standing alone. When we get back, Ryan said eventually, what happens? We talk to HR, make sure everything is documented and above board. Probably you should transfer to a different team, remove the direct reporting line. I don't want special treatment. It's not special treatment. It's protecting both of us from accusations of impropriety. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Okay, that makes sense. And we take it slow, figure out what this is without rushing. We're already holding hands in public and I'm planning family vacations with you. How much slower can we go? Adrian laughed. Fair point, but Chloe's your priority and she should be. We need to make sure this is stable before it becomes a permanent part of her life. Also fair. Ryan squeezed his hand. For what it's worth, she already likes you. That's not nothing. She barely knows me. Kids are good judges of character. She wouldn't have asked you to read to her if she didn't feel safe with you. The weight of that trust settled over Adrian like a blanket. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as broken, as someone who couldn't provide what a family needed, that being trusted with this child's emotional safety felt almost overwhelming. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being broken didn't mean being useless. Maybe scars were just proof that you'd survived something hard and come out the other side. They caught up to Chloe at a playground that was technically closed for the evening, but whose gates were still unlocked. She climbed onto the swings and demanded to be pushed, and Adrian found himself taking turns with Ryan, watching her arc higher and higher against the darkening sky. Higher, she shrieked. I want to touch the clouds. The clouds are pretty far up, sweetheart, Ryan said. Then I'll touch the trees. Adrian pushed her again, and she laughed, the sound pure and unselfconscious. When was the last time he'd laughed like that? When was the last time he'd let himself feel joy without immediately searching for the catch? Eventually, Chloe tired herself out and demanded to be carried back to the hotel. Ryan hoisted her onto his back, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, her head drooping onto his shoulder. She's going to sleep well tonight, Adrian observed. Yeah, which means I'm going to sleep well tonight, for once. Ryan adjusted his grip on Chloe's legs. She's been having more nightmares lately. I think it's stress from school. Stress? She's 6. 6-year-olds have stress too. There's a kid in her class who's been mean to her, and she doesn't understand why someone would be deliberately unkind. What kind of mean? Told her that families need a mom and a dad, and since she only has a dad, she doesn't have a real family. Ryan's voice was tight. The teacher handled it, but Chloe's been anxious since then. Adrian felt a surge of protectiveness toward this child he barely knew. That's awful. Yeah, welcome to parenting. Half of it is trying to explain why people suck sometimes while also convincing your kid that the world is still a good place. Seems impossible. It is, but you do it anyway because what's the alternative? Ryan shifted Chloe's weight. She's worth it. Every sleepless night, every worry, every moment of wondering if I'm screwing her up permanently. She's worth all of it. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but Adrian kept thinking about what Ryan had said, about how love meant choosing someone's worth over your own comfort, about how family wasn't about being perfect, but about showing up anyway, even when it was hard. He'd never thought he could have that, had accepted that his life would be defined by achievement rather than connection, that he'd grow old alone but successful, and that would have to be enough. But walking through Seattle with Ryan and Chloe, feeling the mist on his face and the warmth of Ryan's presence beside him, Adrian started to believe that maybe enough wasn't actually enough. Maybe he wanted more. Maybe he deserved more. Maybe the scars from his treatment weren't an ending but a beginning, a stripping away of one version of his future to make room for something he'd never imagined. Back at the hotel, Ryan put Chloe to bed while Adrian waited in the hallway. When Ryan emerged, he looked exhausted but happy. She's out. Won't wake up until morning. Good. They stood there, neither quite ready to say goodnight. The flight home was early tomorrow, and then they'd be back in the real world with all its complications and policies and careful navigation of professional boundaries. I don't regret this, Ryan said suddenly. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that. I don't regret coming here with you. Neither do I. Good. Because I'm about to make it more complicated. Before Adrian could ask what that meant, Ryan kissed him. Not tentative like last night, but sure, deliberate, like he'd made a decision and was committed to it. Adrian kissed him back, his hands coming up to grip Ryan's shoulders, and for a moment everything else fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ryan said, "Okay, now I'm ready to say goodnight." Adrian laughed, slightly dizzy. "Good night, Ryan." "Good night, Adrian." Adrian made it back to his room before the magnitude of what he'd just committed to hit him. He was dating an employee with a 6-year-old daughter, an employee who deserved better than someone as damaged and uncertain as Adrian.
But he was also dating someone who made him laugh, someone who challenged him and saw through his walls and didn't seem bothered by the tremor in his hands or the scars he carried or the fact that he'd forgotten how to be a person instead of a position. He was dating Ryan, and that was terrifying and exhilarating and more right than anything had felt in 7 years. Adrian pulled out his phone and sent a text. "Thank you for Seattle." Ryan's response came almost immediately. "Thank you for taking a chance." Adrian looked out at the city, at the lights reflected in the water and the rain streaking down his window, and let himself imagine a future that included more than just quarterly earnings and board meetings. A future with late-night conversations and children's books about octopuses and someone who held his hand without flinching at the shake. It was the most terrifying thing he'd ever considered. It was also the only thing that felt like living. The flight home was uneventful. Chloe colored in her activity book while Ryan worked on his laptop, and Adrian pretended to read emails while actually watching them from his seat across the aisle. The easy comfort between them, the way Ryan absently reached over to fix Chloe's ponytail without looking up from his screen, the way Chloe shared her snacks without being asked. They were a unit, had been for 4 years, and Adrian was trying to figure out where he might fit into that picture. When they landed, reality came rushing back. Adrian had a car waiting, and Ryan needed to get Chloe home and settled before the school week started. They stood in the terminal, the moment stretching awkward between them. "I'll see you Monday?" Ryan asked. "Yeah, Monday. We should probably not arrive together." "Probably not." Chloe tugged on Ryan's hand. "Can Adrian come to dinner this week?" Ryan looked at Adrian, a question in his eyes. Adrian knew he should say no, should establish boundaries, should take this slow like they'd agreed. Instead, he said, "I'd like that." "Wednesday?" Ryan suggested. "I'll cook. Nothing fancy." "Wednesday works." They parted ways at the terminal exit, and Adrian climbed into his car feeling like he'd left something important behind. His driver asked about the conference, and Adrian gave the standard responses while his mind stayed fixed on Ryan and Chloe, on the risk he was taking and whether it would be worth it. His apartment felt especially empty when he got home. The same expensive furniture, the same view, the same silence that had felt like peace for years but now just felt like absence. He'd lived here for 5 years and still hadn't bothered to hang anything on the walls or buy plants or do any of the things that made a space feel lived in. He stood at the window, looking out at the city, and wondered what Ryan's place looked like. Probably cluttered with Chloe's drawings and toys, probably warm in a way this sterile box could never be. His phone rang. His mother, probably checking in on the conference. He let it go to voicemail, not ready to explain where his head was, not ready to defend choices he'd only just made. Instead, he texted Ryan. "Home safe?" The response came a few minutes later. "Just walked in." "Chloe's already demanding pizza for dinner because apparently that's our Seattle tradition now. Could be worse traditions." "True. See you Wednesday. Don't bring anything, just yourself." Adrian smiled at his phone like an idiot, then forced himself to stop and deal with the stack of work that had accumulated while he was gone. But concentration was impossible, his mind constantly drifting back to Seattle, to the way Ryan had looked at him in the hotel hallway, to Chloe's easy acceptance of his presence in her life. He was in so far over his head he couldn't even see the surface anymore. Monday morning came too fast and not fast enough. Adrian arrived at the office early, the building still mostly empty, and went straight to his meeting with the head of HR. Margaret Chen had been with the company since the beginning, knew where all the bodies were buried, and had zero patience for executive nonsense. "So you're dating an employee?" she said without preamble once Adrian explained the situation. "Yes." "How long?" "Technically, 3 days. Realistically, 3 weeks." Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Ryan Blake, team lead in product development. Good employee, no disciplinary issues, solid performance reviews." "You already looked him up." "I look everyone up. It's my job." She tapped her pen against her desk. "Here's the situation. We don't have a policy explicitly forbidding relationships between executives and lower-level employees, but we do have policies about conflicts of interest and favoritism." "I know. That's why I'm here." "Smart. Most executives try to hide these things until they explode publicly." Margaret pulled up something on her computer. "Here's what I recommend. First, Ryan transfers to a different team, preferably one that doesn't fall under your direct oversight.
Second, any performance reviews, promotions, or compensation changes for Ryan go through an independent committee. Third, you both sign acknowledgement forms stating that this relationship is consensual and that you understand the policies around workplace conduct. Done. I'm not finished. Fourth, you need to disclose this to the board. They'll have opinions. Adrian had expected that, but still felt his stomach drop. The board was old school, conservative, and not particularly fond of anything that might generate negative publicity. When? He asked. Next board meeting is in 2 weeks. I'll add it to the agenda. Margaret's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this the right way. Most people in your position would either hide it and hope nobody noticed or use their power to prevent any consequences. You're doing neither. I don't want to put Ryan in a position where his career advancement is questioned because of our relationship. Then don't. Keep things professional at work, don't show favoritism, and let his work speak for itself. She handed him a stack of forms. Get these filled out and returned by end of week. And Adrian, be careful. Not everyone is going to be as understanding as I am. Adrian took the forms and headed to his office, already dreading the board meeting, but this was the price of doing things right, of refusing to let power dynamics corrupt something that could be good. He didn't see Ryan until late afternoon, passing each other in the hallway outside a conference room. They both stopped, the air between them suddenly charged. Hey, Ryan said. Hey, how was your morning? Met with HR. Got some paperwork for us to fill out. Ryan nodded, understanding immediately. Okay, whatever we need to do. They were being watched by at least 3 people Adrian could see, so he kept his voice professional. I'll email you the details. We can discuss it tomorrow. Tomorrow. Right. Well, Ryan's eyes said what his words didn't. That he wanted to say more, do more, but couldn't, not here. They went their separate ways, and Adrian felt the loss of that easy intimacy they'd found in Seattle. This was the reality of what they'd chosen. Stolen moments and careful distance and always being aware of who was watching. He'd known it would be like this. Had warned Ryan it would be like this. But knowing and experiencing were different things. And by the time Wednesday rolled around, Adrian was ready to climb the walls with frustration. Ryan's address led him to a modest neighborhood 20 minutes from downtown, the kind of area where kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, and people actually knew their neighbors. The house was small but well-maintained, with a garden that looked loved and a swing set in the backyard visible from the street. Adrian sat in his car for a full minute, trying to calm his nerves. This was just dinner, with Ryan and Chloe. Nothing complicated about that, except for absolutely everything. He finally forced himself out of the car and up the front walk. Before he could knock, the door flew open and Chloe stood there in mismatched socks and a dress covered in dinosaurs. You're here! Daddy's making pasta, but he burned the garlic bread, so we might have to order pizza again. I did not burn it, Ryan called from somewhere inside. It's just extra crispy. Chloe rolled her eyes with impressive 6-year-old disdain. Extra crispy means burned. Adrian stepped inside, taking in the chaos of a home actually lived in. Chloe's artwork covered the refrigerator. Books spilled from shelves. A half-finished puzzle occupied the coffee table. It was nothing like his sterile apartment, and it was perfect. Ryan appeared from the kitchen, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days. He looked more relaxed than Adrian had ever seen him at work, and the sight did something to Adrian's chest. Hey, ignore Chloe. The bread is fine. It's burned, Chloe insisted. It's fine. Adrian hid his smile. I'm sure it's great. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Chloe talked non-stop. Ryan interjected with corrections to her more creative storytelling, and Adrian found himself laughing more than he had in months. The pasta was good, the bread was definitely a little burned, and none of it mattered because this warmth, this life, was worth more than any perfectly executed meal in his empty apartment. After dinner, Chloe dragged Adrian to see her room, which was exactly what he'd expected. Pink walls, stuffed animals everywhere, and an entire shelf dedicated to books about ocean life. This is where I sleep, she announced, pointing to a bed covered in blankets. And this is my treasure box. She pulled out a small wooden box and opened it reverently. Inside were the kinds of things a 6-year-old considered treasures. A smooth rock, a feather, a ticket stub from the aquarium, and a photo of Ryan and another man, both laughing at something off camera.
That's Papa, Chloe said softly, touching the photo. He died before I could really remember him, but Daddy says he loved me very much. Adrian's throat tightened. I'm sure he did. Do you think he'd like you? The question caught him off guard. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. Chloe studied him with those serious brown eyes. I think he would. You make Daddy smile, and Daddy doesn't smile enough. Before Adrian could figure out how to respond to that, Ryan appeared in the doorway. Chloe, it's almost bedtime. But Adrian just got here. Adrian will still be here tomorrow. Say goodnight. Chloe hugged Adrian with surprising fierceness, and he found himself hugging her back, this small person who'd decided to trust him for reasons he couldn't fathom. Good night, Chloe. Good night, Adrian. Will you come back? He looked at Ryan, saw the hope and fear mixed in his expression, and made a choice. Yeah, I'll come back. After Ryan got Chloe settled, he found Adrian standing in the living room, studying a photo on the mantel. It showed Ryan and Daniel on what looked like a hiking trip, both sunburned and grinning, younger versions of themselves who had no idea what was coming. That was about 6 months before he got sick, Ryan said quietly, coming to stand beside him. We'd gone to Yosemite. Chloe was barely 2, stayed with my sister for the weekend. You look happy. We were. For a while, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Ryan's voice carried an edge of old grief, worn smooth by time, but still there. Then it wasn't, and I had to figure out how to keep going anyway. Adrian set the photo down carefully. Do you ever regret it? Having something good and losing it? No, never. Ryan turned to face him fully. Loving Daniel, having Chloe, building the life we had, none of that was a mistake just because it ended badly. The pain doesn't cancel out the good parts. I don't know if I believe that. You don't have to. Not yet. Ryan reached for Adrian's hand, and the tremor that Adrian always tried to hide didn't seem to bother him at all. But maybe someday you will. They stood there in Ryan's living room with its lived-in chaos and photo evidence of a life that had continued despite catastrophic loss, and Adrian felt something in him start to crack open. Not breaking, exactly. More like thawing. I'm scared, Adrian admitted, of this. Of wanting something and having it turn into another thing I survive instead of something I actually get to keep. Yeah, well, welcome to the club. Fear's pretty much the baseline condition of caring about anything. Ryan's thumb traced circles on Adrian's wrist. But here's the thing, you're already in it. You came to dinner, you read to Chloe, you held my hand in Seattle. You don't get to pretend you're still standing on the sidelines. That's not fair. Life's not fair, but you already knew that. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to find some logical reason why this was different, why he could somehow participate without fully committing. But Ryan was right. He'd already jumped. He was just too stubborn to admit he was falling. So what now? Adrian asked. Now we figure it out. One day at a time. Some days will be good, some will be terrible, and we'll deal with both. Ryan stepped closer, close enough that Adrian could feel the warmth radiating off him. But we do it together. That's the deal. I'm not good at together. Neither am I anymore. But we'll learn. Ryan kissed him then, soft and certain, and Adrian let himself sink into it, let himself stop calculating risks and analyzing outcomes and just exist in this moment with this person who somehow saw past all his defenses and wanted him anyway. When they finally broke apart, Ryan said, "Stay, just for a little while longer." So Adrian stayed. They sat on the couch, Ryan's head on Adrian's shoulder, and talked about nothing important, about the terrible coffee at work, and Chloe's upcoming science fair project, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Easy conversation that felt monumental simply because it existed, because Adrian was choosing to be here instead of alone in his apartment. He left around 11, Ryan walking him to the door like a proper date, even though they'd spent the last hour discussing the structural integrity of different pasta shapes. See you tomorrow, Ryan said. At work, where we have to pretend this isn't happening. For now. Until the board meeting, Adrian grimaced. Don't remind me. It'll be fine. You'll walk in, tell them you're dating an employee, and they'll either accept it or they won't. Either way, we'll deal with it. Your optimism is unsettling, Ryan grinned. One of my many charms. Now, go home before I convince you to stay all night.
and give my neighbor something to talk about. Adrian drove home feeling lighter than he had in years, but the lightness didn't last. By the time Friday rolled around, the stress of maintaining professional distance at work while navigating a personal relationship was taking its toll. He and Ryan had barely spoken all week, except for one tense meeting about the Henderson project where they'd both been overly formal and awkward. The board meeting loomed like an execution date. Saturday morning, Adrian woke up to his phone ringing. Ryan's name on the screen made him answer immediately, despite the ungodly hour. "Hey, sorry, I know it's early," Ryan said, his voice tight with stress. "But I need help." Adrian sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "My landlord just called. There's a massive leak from the unit above mine. Water's coming through the ceiling in Chloe's room. He's sending someone to fix it, but we can't stay here, and my sister's out of town, and I don't—" Ryan stopped, took a breath. "Can we stay with you? Just for tonight, maybe 2? I'll find a hotel if that's too much, but Chloe's already freaked out and—" "Come here," Adrian interrupted. "Both of you. I'll text you the address." "Are you sure?" "Ryan, I have 3 empty bedrooms and a couch that cost more than my first car. Come here." There was a pause, then Ryan said quietly, "Thank you." They arrived an hour later, Chloe clutching a backpack and looking small and worried. Adrian's apartment felt even more sterile with them standing in it, this warm, real family in his cold, perfect space. "Whoa," Chloe said, eyes wide. "Do you live in a hotel?" "It does kind of look like one, doesn't it?" Adrian agreed. Ryan was looking around with an expression Adrian couldn't quite read. "This is... wow. Too much?" "No, just different. Very you." Adrian wasn't sure if that was a compliment, but he chose to take it as one. "I'll show you the guest room. It has its own bathroom." The guest room was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment. White walls, generic art, furniture that had never been used. Chloe immediately went to the window, pressing her face against the glass. "We're so high up. I can see everything." 53rd floor, Adrian confirmed. "Does it scare you, being so high?" "Sometimes, but mostly I just forget about it." Chloe turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Daddy says it's okay to be scared of things. He says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, it means you do the thing anyway." Adrian glanced at Ryan, who shrugged with a small smile. "She's not wrong. Your dad's a smart man." "I know," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "He's the smartest person I know. Well, except for my teacher. She knows everything about math." They got settled, Ryan unpacking their hastily thrown-together overnight bags, while Chloe explored the apartment with the enthusiasm of an archaeologist discovering a new tomb. She found Adrian's extensive book collection and demanded to know if he'd read all of them. "Most of them," Adrian admitted. "Even the boring-looking ones? Especially those." "Why?" "Because sometimes boring books have interesting ideas hiding in them." Chloe considered this, then pulled out a physics textbook that Adrian had kept from college. "Is this one boring or interesting?" "Both. It's about how the universe works." Her eyes lit up. "Can you read it to me?" Ryan appeared in the doorway. "Chloe, that's not a picture book. Adrian doesn't want to—" "Actually, I don't mind," Adrian said, surprising himself. "But fair warning, I'll probably have to explain a lot." "That's okay. I like learning things." So Adrian found himself sitting on his pristine couch with a 6-year-old, reading simplified explanations of quantum mechanics and trying to answer questions like, if everything is made of atoms, what are atoms made of? And why doesn't the moon fall down? Ryan watched from the kitchen where he was making sandwiches, and when Adrian caught his eye, the look Ryan gave him made his chest ache in the best way. Later, after Chloe had exhausted her questions about particle physics and moved on to building an elaborate fort out of Adrian's throw pillows, Ryan pulled Adrian into the kitchen. "You're good with her," Ryan said quietly. "I'm winging it." "So is every parent on the planet, but you're good with her anyway." Ryan leaned against the counter, close enough that Adrian could smell his cologne. "Thank you for this, for letting us invade your space." "You're not invading. You're—" Adrian stopped, searching for the right word. "You're here. That's different. Is it?" "Yeah, people I work with invade. You're someone I want here." Ryan's smile was soft. "Good. Because I want to be here." They stood in Adrian's sterile kitchen that had never felt like a real kitchen until Ryan was in it.
and Adrian thought about how quickly things could change. A month ago, he'd been alone and convinced that was the only option. Now he had Ryan making sandwiches in his kitchen and Chloe building forts in his living room, and the scared part of him wanted to run while the hopeful part wanted to hold on tight and never let go. "Hey," Ryan said, touching Adrian's hand. "You okay? You went somewhere." "Just thinking." "About?" "About how I don't know what I'm doing, about how I'm probably going to mess this up." "Probably," Ryan agreed easily. "I'll probably mess it up too. We'll take turns disappointing each other and then figure out if we can live with that." "That's not very romantic." "No, but it's honest, and I think we both need honest more than we need romance." Adrian couldn't argue with that. "The board meeting is Monday." "I know. They might make me choose, the company or this." Ryan's expression tightened. "And if they do?" "I don't know yet." The admission felt like failure, but it was the truth. Adrian had built Cole Technologies from nothing. It was his legacy, his proof that he'd survived and thrived and mattered. Walking away from it would mean walking away from the identity he'd constructed over 8 years of 70-hour weeks and calculated risks. But looking at Ryan, at this person who'd somehow become essential in the space of a few weeks, Adrian couldn't imagine walking away from this either. "I guess we'll find out Monday," Ryan said finally. "Yeah, I guess we will." The weekend passed in a strange bubble of domesticity. Adrian ordered groceries for the first time in months because Chloe needed snacks, and Ryan wanted to cook actual meals. They watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures because Chloe was still on her ocean kick. Ryan worked on his laptop while Adrian caught up on emails, and Chloe colored at the dining table, her tongue poking out in concentration. Sunday night, after Chloe was asleep in the guest room, Ryan found Adrian standing at the window looking out at the city. "Penny for your thoughts," Ryan said. "Just wondering when I started caring more about this than about work." "And?" "Sometime between Seattle and right now. Probably the moment Chloe asked me about octopuses." Ryan moved to stand beside him, their reflections ghostly in the window. "You know you're allowed to want both, right? The company and this? They're not mutually exclusive. Aren't they? If the board says I have to choose, then you choose. But don't make that decision before you have to. Don't give them that power." Adrian turned to look at him. "You really think it's that simple?" "No. I think it's impossibly complicated, but I also think you've spent so long protecting yourself that you've forgotten how to fight for something instead of just surviving it." The words hit harder than they should have. "That's not fair." "Probably not. But is it true?" Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to defend the careful life he'd built, but he couldn't, because Ryan was right. For 7 years, Adrian had been in survival mode, focused on building something that couldn't be taken away by illness or bad luck or the randomness of the universe. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to achieve, and he'd been miserable doing it. "What if I mess this up?" Adrian asked. "What if I try to fight for both and lose everything?" "Then you lose everything, and we figure out what comes next, together." Ryan took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "But what if you don't? What if you actually get to have both?" "I don't know if I believe in that kind of happy ending." "Neither did I. Then you showed up in my lab at midnight and fixed my memory leak, and I started thinking maybe I was wrong." They stood there in the darkness of Adrian's apartment with the city spread out below them, and Adrian let himself imagine a version of his life where he didn't have to choose, where he could be CEO and partner and whatever Chloe needed him to be, where the scars from his past didn't dictate his future. It felt dangerous to hope for that much. It felt more dangerous not to. Monday morning came with all the inevitability of a deadline. Adrian put on his best suit-like armor and arrived at the office an hour before the board meeting. The agenda had been circulated over the weekend, and he knew several board members had already called Margaret in HR to express their concerns. Ryan texted him at 8, "Good luck. I'm here if you need me." Adrian stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you. For everything." The boardroom was on the 42nd floor, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. Adrian had sat through hundreds of meetings here, presenting strategy and defending decisions, and proving over and over that he deserved to lead this company. He'd never been nervous before. Today, his hands shook so badly he had to shove them in his pockets. The board filtered in, 8 members, mostly older men with a few exceptions. Margaret sat in as HR representative, her expression professionally neutral. The chairman, Robert Chen, called the meeting to order. They went through the standard agenda first: quarterly earnings, which were strong, the Henderson project, which was on schedule, a potential acquisition that Adrian recommended against. All of it familiar territory, the kind of business discussions Adrian could navigate in his sleep. Then Robert said, "I believe Adrian has a personal matter to address." Every eye in the room turned to him. Adrian stood, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could all hear it. "I'm dating an employee," he said, deciding to lead with the truth. "His name is Ryan Blake. He's a team lead in product development. We've been seeing each other for about a month, and I wanted to disclose this relationship to avoid any appearance of impropriety." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, one of the board members, Janet, the CFO of a competing tech company, spoke up. "You're dating a subordinate?" "Ryan doesn't report directly to me, but yes, he works for the company." "And you thought this was appropriate?" Another board member, Thomas, looked genuinely scandalized. "I think it's complicated, but I also think it's real, and I'm not willing to hide it." Adrian forced himself to meet each board member's eyes. "I've worked with HR to ensure there's no conflict of interest. Ryan's being transferred to a different team, and any career advancement will go through an independent review committee." "That's not the point," Thomas said. "The point is optics. What message does this send to the rest of the company? That sleeping with the CEO is a viable career strategy? Ryan's career advancement has nothing to do with our relationship. His work speaks for itself. You can't know that. And even if it's true, no one else will believe it." Adrian felt his temper flare. "So what are you suggesting? That I end the relationship because of what people might think?" "I'm suggesting you consider what's best for the company you built." "I am. I'm considering whether I want to lead a company that demands I sacrifice my personal life for appearances." The room erupted. Half the board members were talking at once, some defending Adrian's right to his personal life, others insisting this was a disaster waiting to happen. Margaret sat quietly, taking notes, while Robert tried to restore order. Finally, Robert slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! This isn't productive." He turned to Adrian. "You've put us in a difficult position. We have shareholders to answer to, employees who will have opinions, and a reputation to protect. I understand that. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're asking us to approve a relationship that creates significant risk for minimal benefit." "The benefit," Adrian said carefully, "is that I get to have a life outside this company, something I haven't had in 7 years, something I didn't think I deserved until recently." Janet's expression softened slightly. "Adrian, no one's saying you don't deserve happiness, but there are ways to find it that don't create legal and ethical complications for your company. You're right. I could date someone who doesn't work here, someone safe and uncomplicated who fits neatly into the box of what a CEO's partner should be." Adrian took a breath. "But that's not what this is, and I'm not willing to walk away from it just because it's messy." "Then maybe you need to walk away from the company," Thomas said bluntly. The words hung in the air like a threat. "Is that what you want?" Adrian asked. "For me to resign?" Robert held up a hand. "No one's asking you to resign, but we need to discuss this seriously." "Margaret, what's your assessment?" Margaret straightened. "From an HR perspective, Adrian has done everything right. He disclosed the relationship immediately, worked with me to establish protocols to prevent conflicts of interest, and has been transparent about the situation. Legally, we're covered. Ethically, it's complicated but manageable." "And what about the morale issue?" Janet asked. "How do we prevent this from creating a culture where people think relationships with superiors are acceptable?" "We already have policies against that. The situation is different because Adrian disclosed it proactively and took steps to mitigate the power imbalance." Margaret looked at Adrian. "But Janet's not wrong. This will generate talk, and we need to be prepared to address it." "So we release a statement," Robert said. "Something about how the company supports workplace diversity and personal autonomy while maintaining strict ethical standards. We emphasize the protocols being put in place and make it clear this isn't a blank check for anyone else." "That could work," Janet agreed reluctantly. Thomas shook his head. "I still think this is a mistake, but if the board is willing to tolerate it, I won't stand in the way." Adrian felt something unclench in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the absence of immediate catastrophe.
Then we're agreed? Robert looked around the table. Adrian can continue his relationship with appropriate safeguards in place, and will monitor the situation for any negative impacts. One by one, the board members nodded. Not enthusiastic approval, but acceptance. It was more than Adrian had hoped for. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank us yet, Robert said. You're on thin ice, Adrian. One hint of favoritism, one suggestion that this relationship is affecting business decisions, and we'll revisit this conversation. Understood? Understood. The meeting adjourned and Adrian made it to his office before the adrenaline crash hit. He sat at his desk, his hands shaking worse than ever, and tried to process what had just happened. He'd fought for this, had stood in front of people whose respect he'd spent years earning, and defended his right to want something beyond quarterly earnings and strategic growth. And they'd let him. His phone buzzed. Ryan. How did it go? Adrian typed back. They didn't fire me. That's good, right? Yeah, that's good. Celebrating tonight? Adrian thought about his empty apartment, about the weekend he'd spent with Ryan and Chloe, and how right it had felt despite the chaos. Thought about choosing to fight instead of choosing to survive. Come to my place after work. Bring Chloe. I'll order from that Thai place she liked. You sure? Yeah, I'm sure. Because he was. For the first time in 7 years, Adrian was sure about something that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. He was sure about Ryan, about Chloe, about choosing to build something that mattered more than success. It was terrifying. It was also the only thing that made sense. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and emails and carefully neutral conversations with executives who'd clearly heard about the board meeting. Adrian handled it all with the same professional competence he'd always brought to work, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Ryan making coffee in his kitchen, about Chloe explaining quantum mechanics to her stuffed animals, about how his apartment had felt less like a sterile box and more like a home with them in it. At 5:30, Ryan appeared in his doorway. They were being careful at work, maintaining professional distance, but Adrian could see the question in Ryan's eyes. We're good, Adrian said quietly. The board approved it, with conditions, but we're good. Ryan's relief was visible. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. They stood there for a moment, everything they couldn't say at work hanging between them. Then Ryan said, See you at 7? And Adrian nodded, and Ryan left, and Adrian went back to work with a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with business. That evening, Ryan and Chloe showed up with overnight bags because Ryan's apartment was still being repaired. Chloe had somehow acquired even more questions about the universe in the 48 hours since they'd left, and she interrogated Adrian about black holes while Ryan unpacked in the guest room. But if nothing can escape a black hole, how do we know they exist? Chloe demanded. We can see their effects on things around them, stars orbiting nothing, light bending in strange ways. So we know they're there because of what they do to other things? Exactly. Chloe processed this, then said, Like how I know Daddy's happy because he smiles more now? Adrian's throat went tight. Yeah, kind of like that. Ryan emerged from the guest room in time to hear this exchange. He met Adrian's eyes across the room, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or just recognition that this thing they were building mattered to more than just the two of them. After dinner, after Chloe had fallen asleep on Adrian's couch during a documentary about space exploration, Ryan carried her to bed and then came back to find Adrian cleaning up the kitchen. You don't have to do that, Ryan said. I can handle it. I know, but I want to. They worked in comfortable silence, loading the dishwasher and wiping down counters. Domestic tasks that Adrian usually avoided or paid someone else to handle, but with Ryan they felt different, less like chores and more like building something together. So the board really approved it? Ryan asked eventually. With a lot of conditions and warnings, but yes. And you're okay with that? Adrian dried his hands on a towel, considering. I'm okay with fighting for this. I'm okay with proving them wrong about the favoritism thing. I'm okay with having something in my life that matters more than work. Even if it's hard? Especially because it's hard. Easy things aren't usually worth having. Ryan smiled. Someone smart told me that once. Sounds like a wise person. He has his moments. They ended up on the couch, Ryan's head on Adrian's shoulder, talking about nothing and everything. About Chloe's school project that was due next week, and whether Adrian's apartment had ever been actually lived in before now, and how strange it was to go from isolated to connected in the space of a month. I keep waiting for it to feel wrong, Adrian admitted, for the panic to set in, for my brain to convince me this is a mistake. And it hasn't happened yet. Maybe it won't. Or maybe it will, and we'll deal with it when it does. Ryan shifted to look at him. You don't have to be perfect at this, Adrian. You just have to show up. I'm not good at showing up. You're here right now, aren't you? You fought for us in front of your board. You let Chloe ask you a million questions about physics. You're showing up in all the ways that matter. Adrian wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that his presence was enough, that he didn't have to perform or prove or protect himself from the possibility of loss. But 7 years of survival instincts didn't disappear overnight. What if I can't do this? He asked quietly. What if I'm too damaged from everything that happened to actually build something good? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Daniel used to tell me that broken things can still be beautiful, that scars prove you survived something hard. I didn't believe him at first. After he died, all I could see was the brokenness, the parts of me that would never be the same. What changed?
Chloe, time. Realizing that I could honor what I'd lost while still moving forward. Ryan took Adrian's hand, the one that always trembled. You're not too damaged. You're just someone who survived something terrible and is still figuring out how to live instead of just exist. That's not weakness. That's courage. Adrian felt something break open in his chest. Some wall he'd been maintaining for so long he'd forgotten it was there.
He pulled Ryan closer, buried his face in his shoulder, and let himself feel all the fear and hope and desperate want that he'd been holding back.
I'm scared, he whispered. I know, me too. What if I lose this? Then you lose it, and you survive that too. But what if you don't? What if you get to keep it? Adrian didn't have an answer for that. Didn't know how to imagine a future where good things stayed instead of being ripped away by illness or circumstance or the randomness of the universe. But he was here, with Ryan solid and real beside him, and Chloe sleeping in his guest room, and maybe that was enough for now. Maybe he didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe he just needed to stop running from the questions. 3 weeks after this board meeting, Adrian realized he'd stopped checking his email at 2 in the morning. It was a small thing, barely worth noticing, except that compulsive midnight inbox clearing had been his routine for years. Now he woke up at 7 like a normal person, made coffee, and sometimes found Ryan already awake in the kitchen because the leak repair had turned into a mold remediation that had turned into Ryan and Chloe essentially living in Adrian's guest room indefinitely. Adrian should have minded, should have felt invaded or crowded or desperate to reclaim his space. Instead, he kept finding excuses for why they shouldn't leave yet. The contractor said another week, Ryan mentioned one morning, scrolling through messages from his landlord. Stay as long as you need, Adrian said, too quickly. Ryan looked up from his phone, a small smile playing at his lips. You sure? We've been here almost a month. I'm sure. What Adrian didn't say was that his apartment finally felt lived in, that he'd gotten used to Chloe's drawings on his refrigerator and Ryan's terrible coffee mugs taking up cabinet space, that coming home to voices and life and the comfortable chaos of other people felt better than the silence ever had. But not everything was easy. At work, the careful distance they maintained felt like acting in a play where everyone knew the script except them. People watched them differently now, some with judgment, others with curiosity, a few with something that looked like approval. Adrian ignored all of it and focused on proving that nothing about his leadership had changed, except everything had changed. He left work at reasonable hours now, declined weekend meetings if they weren't critical, actually used his vacation days for the first time in 3 years. The company didn't collapse. If anything, his team seemed more motivated, though Adrian suspected that had less to do with his schedule and more to do with the fact that he'd stopped treating work like a competition he had to win every single day. Ryan had transferred to the infrastructure team under Victor Chen, a senior director who reported to the CTO rather than through Adrian's chain of command. The move had been smooth, professionally speaking, but Adrian could see the adjustment weighing on Ryan. He missed his old team, missed the work he'd been doing, even if he understood why the change was necessary. "How's the new project?" Adrian asked one evening. They were at his dining table, Chloe doing homework while Ryan worked on his laptop.
Fine. Different. Ryan didn't look up from his screen. Victor's good. The team's solid. It's just not what I'm used to. You hate it. I don't hate it. Ryan stopped, closed his laptop. I worked 3 years to get where I was, built relationships with my team, understood the product inside and out. Now I'm starting over because we're dating, and some days that feels really unfair. Adrian's chest tightened with guilt. I'm sorry. Don't be. This was the right call, I know that. Doesn't make it less frustrating. Ryan rubbed his face. And before you start spiraling, I'm not blaming you. I'm just venting. Venting is allowed. Good. Because I have more. Ryan gestured at his laptop. Victor's great, but he manages differently than your VP did. More hands-on, which means less autonomy. I'm basically relearning how to do my job with someone watching over my shoulder. That sounds terrible. It is. But it's also temporary. Once I prove myself to Victor, he'll back off. Ryan reached across the table to take Adrian's hand. I'm not going anywhere. This is just the adjustment period. Daddy, what's 12 times 7? Chloe interrupted without looking up from her math worksheet. What do you think it is? Ryan asked. 84? Show me how you got there. While Chloe explained her calculation method, Adrian watched them, this easy back and forth, the way Ryan could pivot from adult frustration to patient teaching without missing a beat. The way Chloe trusted that her father would help her figure it out rather than just giving her the answer. Adrian's phone buzzed. A text from his mother, the third one this week. Call me when you have a chance. We need to talk. He'd been avoiding that conversation since the board meeting. His mother had built her own successful business, understood the demands of leadership, and had opinions about everything. Adrian wasn't ready to hear those opinions about Ryan. You okay? Ryan asked, noticing his expression. My mother wants to talk. About us? Probably. I haven't exactly announced that I'm dating someone. Are you planning to? Adrian looked at him, at this person who'd become essential to his daily life, and realized he'd been treating their relationship like something temporary, something that existed in a bubble that might pop if he examined it too closely or let too many people in. Yeah, Adrian said, I should probably do that. Only if you want to, no pressure. But there was pressure, the good kind. The kind that came from wanting to integrate the pieces of his life instead of keeping them carefully separated. He'd done separate for 7 years, and it had kept him safe and miserable. I'll call her this weekend, Adrian decided. The weekend came faster than he wanted. Saturday morning, after Ryan had taken Chloe to her soccer game, Adrian stood at his window with his phone and finally returned his mother's call. Adrian, finally! Patricia Cole's voice was warm but edged with concern. I was beginning to think you'd blocked my number. Sorry, work's been busy. Work is always busy. That's not why you've been avoiding me. Adrian smiled despite himself. His mother had always been able to read him. No, it's not. So are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to hear it from Margaret Chen at our next board liaison meeting? You and Margaret talk? We serve on a non-profit board together. Don't change the subject. Adrian took a breath. I'm seeing someone. Have been for about 2 months now. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because it's complicated. He works for the company, has a 6-year-old daughter. We're kind of figuring things out as we go. There was a pause. Then Patricia said carefully, when you say he works for the company, he was a team lead in product development. Now he's on the infrastructure team to avoid conflicts of interest. I see. And the board knows about this? They approved it, with conditions. Another pause, longer this time. How are you doing with all of this? The question caught Adrian off guard. Not judgment about the situation, not concerns about optics or company policy, just genuine care about how he was handling it. I'm scared, Adrian admitted, but also happier than I've been in years, which somehow makes it more terrifying. That makes sense. You've spent a long time protecting yourself, Adrian. Letting someone in again is brave. Or stupid. Sometimes those are the same thing. He could hear the smile in her voice. Tell me about him, and the daughter. So Adrian did. He talked about Ryan's quiet competence and terrible coffee preferences, about Chloe's obsession with marine biology and her complete lack of filter when asking questions, about how they'd essentially moved into his apartment and he didn't want them to leave, about how foreign and right it all felt. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when Adrian finally ran out of words, she said, "You sound like yourself again, like the person you were before you got sick." "I'm not that person anymore." "No, you're better. You're someone who survived something terrible and is still willing to risk being hurt again. That takes real strength." Adrian's throat felt tight. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough for them?" "Then you won't be, and they'll leave, and you'll survive that too. But what if you are enough? What if you stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and just let yourself have this?" It was almost exactly what Ryan had said weeks ago on this same couch. Maybe they were both right. Maybe Adrian's problem wasn't that he couldn't have good things, but that he refused to believe he could keep them. "I want you to meet them," Adrian said suddenly. "Ryan and Chloe. Not right away, but soon, if that's okay." "I'd love that. Just say when." They talked for another hour about nothing important, and by the time Adrian hung up, something in him had loosened. He'd spent so long keeping his personal life separate from his family, from his work, from anything that might require vulnerability. But separation hadn't protected him. It had just left him isolated. Ryan and Chloe came back around noon, Chloe's soccer uniform grass-stained and her face flushed with triumph. "We won!" she announced, bursting through the door. "I scored a goal. Well, kind of. I kicked it, and it hit another girl, and then went in the net, but Coach said it still counts." "That definitely counts," Adrian agreed. "Congratulations." "Thanks. Can we celebrate with ice cream?" Ryan gave Adrian a look that clearly said, "Please don't undermine my parenting," but Adrian had learned this dance. "After lunch," Adrian said. "Can't have dessert without eating real food first." Chloe deflated slightly, but accepted this with minimal grumbling. While Ryan got her cleaned up, Adrian ordered sandwiches from the deli down the street. They ate on the balcony, which Adrian almost never used, and Chloe provided a play-by-play of the entire soccer game, including detailed descriptions of every goal, near miss, and accidental trip over her own feet. "You really love soccer, huh?" Adrian asked. "It's okay. I like the running part. The ball part is harder." "But you're sticking with it?" "Daddy says you have to try things, even if you're not good at them yet. That's how you get better." "Your daddy's right a lot, isn't he?" Chloe nodded seriously. "Most of the time. Except when he says vegetables are delicious. That's a lie." Ryan choked on his sandwich. "I never said they were delicious. I said they were important." "Same thing. Completely different things." Adrian watched them bicker about the merits of broccoli and felt that now familiar ache in his chest. Want mixed with fear, mixed with something that felt dangerously close to love. He wasn't ready to name it yet, but it was there, growing stronger every day. After lunch and the promised ice cream, Chloe crashed hard on the couch, the morning's excitement catching up with her. Ryan covered her with a blanket and joined Adrian in the kitchen, where he was loading the dishwasher. "You talked to your mother," Ryan said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "You look lighter, less like you're waiting for disaster." "She wants to meet you, both of you." Ryan leaned against the counter. "And you're okay with that?" Terrified, but "Yeah, I think so." Adrian dried his hands on a towel. "She's going to love Chloe and have opinions about you and probably corner me privately to make sure I'm not screwing this up. Sounds like a mom. She's good at it. Better than I gave her credit for when I was younger and thought I knew everything." "When did you stop thinking you knew everything?" "About 3 months into chemotherapy, when I realized I didn't even know how my own body worked." Adrian said it lightly, but Ryan's expression shifted. "You don't talk about it much, the cancer, the treatment." "Not a lot to say. I was sick. They tried to fix me. It mostly worked except for the parts that didn't." "That's not nothing, Adrian." "No, but it's also not who I am anymore. Or at least I'm trying not to let it be." Adrian traced a water drop on the counter. "For a long time, that's all I was. The guy who survived cancer. The CEO who built a company while in remission. Every story about me included that detail, like it was the most interesting thing about me." "It's pretty interesting." "Maybe. But it's also reductive. I'm more than what I survived." Ryan moved closer, close enough that Adrian could feel his warmth. "Yeah, you are. You're also the guy who reads physics textbooks to 6-year-olds and makes terrible jokes during debugging sessions and stress bakes at midnight when you think no one will notice." "I don't stress bake." "You made brownies at 1 in the morning last Tuesday." "That was different. I couldn't sleep." Because you were stressed about the investor meeting. Adrian couldn't argue with that. Okay, fine, I stress bake. It's endearing. Also, the brownies were amazing, so I'm not complaining. Ryan's hand found Adrian's. I like all of you, Adrian, the successful CEO part and the cancer survivor part, and the person who's still figuring out how to let people in. All of it. Even the damaged parts? Especially those, they're what make you real. Adrian kissed him, right there in the kitchen in the middle of the afternoon with Chloe sleeping 20 feet away. It was reckless and perfect and felt like claiming something he'd been too afraid to reach for. When they pulled apart, Ryan said, "So when do we meet your mother? How about next Sunday, dinner, somewhere neutral? Nothing too formal." Define nothing too formal. The kind of place where Chloe can order chicken fingers without anyone judging us. Perfect. The week leading up to the dinner felt like preparing for an exam Adrian hadn't studied for. He changed the reservation 3 times, debated appropriate conversation topics, and generally drove himself halfway to an anxiety attack before Ryan physically removed his phone and told him to breathe. "She's your mother, not a board of directors," Ryan pointed out. "My mother is scarier than the board." "Great. Looking forward to this." But when Sunday arrived, and they met Patricia at a bistro that split the difference between casual and nice, Adrian's anxiety dissolved the moment his mother hugged him. She was smaller than he remembered, though that was probably because he'd gotten taller since high school. Her hair had more gray than the last time he'd seen her, and she wore the kind of effortlessly elegant outfit that suggested she'd taken this seriously without overthinking it. "Mom, this is Ryan, and this is Chloe." Patricia smiled at Ryan, then crouched down to Chloe's level. "Hi, Chloe. I've heard a lot about you." Chloe regarded her with serious eyes. "Are you Adrian's mom?" "I am." "You're pretty. Do you like octopuses?" Patricia laughed, delighted. "I don't know much about them, but I'm willing to learn." "Good, because they're really cool and most people don't appreciate them enough." They were seated at a corner table with enough space that Chloe didn't feel trapped. She ordered chicken fingers without hesitation, and Patricia asked her questions about soccer and school and her favorite sea creatures, treating Chloe's answers with the same attention she'd give a business colleague. Ryan relaxed incrementally, and Adrian watched them all interact with something close to wonder. His mother, who'd raised him alone after his father left and built a consulting empire from scratch. Ryan, who'd survived loss and single parenthood and was still somehow optimistic. Chloe, who had no idea how significant this dinner was and just wanted to explain the difference between octopi and squid. "So Ryan," Patricia said once Chloe had exhausted her cephalopod facts, "Adrian tells me you're on the infrastructure team now." "As of last month, yes." "How are you finding it?" Ryan glanced at Adrian, then back to Patricia. "Honestly, it's an adjustment. I miss my old team and the work I was doing, but I understand why the transfer was necessary. Because you're dating the CEO. Because we wanted to avoid any appearance of impropriety," Ryan corrected gently. "I don't want my career advancement questioned because of our relationship." Patricia nodded approvingly. "That's smart. Difficult, but smart. That seems to be the theme of my life lately." "Mine too," Adrian said. His mother looked between them, and Adrian could see her evaluating, processing, coming to conclusions. Finally, she said, "I'm glad you found each other. Both of you look happy in a way that's hard to fake." "We are," Ryan said simply. "Good. Then that's all that matters." Patricia turned to Adrian. "Though I have to say, I'm relieved you finally listened to me about work-life balance. You've been telling me that for years. 7 years to be exact. Since right after your treatment ended and you threw yourself into the company like you were trying to prove something." Adrian felt Ryan's attention sharpen beside him. "I was trying to prove something, that I was more than just a sick person. You never were just that. But I understood the impulse." Patricia's expression softened. "I'm just happy you finally found something worth coming home to." Chloe chose that moment to knock over her water glass, and the conversation dissolved into cleanup and reassurances that no, it was fine, these things happen. But Patricia's words stayed with Adrian through dessert and goodbyes, and the drive back to his apartment, something worth coming home to. That night, after Chloe was asleep and Ryan was reading on the couch, Adrian found himself standing in the guest room doorway,
watching Chloe's small form under the covers. She'd brought so much life into his carefully controlled world, had asked questions he didn't know how to answer, and trusted him in ways he didn't deserve, had made his apartment feel like a home just by being in it. "She really likes you," Ryan said from behind him.
Adrian hadn't heard him approach. "I really like her." "It shows. You're good with her." "I'm figuring it out as I go." That's all parenting is, controlled chaos and hoping you don't permanently damage them. Adrian turned to face him. "Ryan, I need to tell you something." "Okay." Ryan's expression went carefully neutral, prepared for bad news. "I love this. The three of us. Your apartment's been ready for 2 weeks, and I keep not mentioning it because I don't want you to leave." Adrian's heart was pounding. "I know that's probably too much too fast, but I can't keep pretending this is temporary. It doesn't feel temporary." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I got the email from my landlord 3 days ago saying everything was finished. I didn't mention it either." "Why not?" "Because this feels like home now. My apartment is just a place we used to live." Ryan moved closer. "Chloe asked me yesterday if we were staying here forever. I didn't know what to tell her." "What do you want to tell her?" "That we're staying as long as Adrian wants us. That this isn't just about a broken pipe and convenience anymore. That we're building something real." Adrian's throat felt tight. "Is that what you want?" "Yeah, but I need to know you want it too. Not just the idea of it, but the reality. The tantrums and the homework battles. And the nights when Chloe has nightmares and we're both exhausted. All of it. I want all of it," Adrian said. "I want you to stop calling this the guest room and start calling it Chloe's room. I want to stop pretending we're just friends when people ask. I want to figure out how to be what you both need. We don't need perfect, Adrian. We just need present. I can do present. Then we're staying, if that's really what you want." "It's what I want." Ryan kissed him, soft and certain, and Adrian felt the last piece of his careful control crack away. He was choosing this. Not because he had to, not because it was logical or strategic, but because he wanted it with an intensity that terrified him. They stood in the hallway of Adrian's apartment that was becoming their apartment, and Adrian let himself imagine a future that included more than just survival. A future with school pickups and soccer games and terrible coffee mugs. With someone who saw his scars and didn't flinch. With a child who trusted him to show up even when he had no idea what he was doing. "Your mom really liked Chloe," Ryan said eventually. "My mom has excellent taste. She seems worried about you, though. Kept watching you like she was checking that you were really okay. She does that. Has since the cancer. I don't think she'll ever stop worrying that it'll come back." "Do you worry about that?" Adrian considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. Less than I used to. For a while, every ache or pain sent me spiraling. Now I just try to focus on being here, in this moment, instead of catastrophizing about futures that might never happen." "That's probably healthy." "Probably. My therapist would be proud." "You have a therapist?" "Started seeing one about 6 months ago. Figured I should deal with some of my issues instead of just white-knuckling through life." Ryan smiled. "Look at you doing emotional work. Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. Just proud." The word hit Adrian harder than it should have. Proud. Like Ryan saw effort where Adrian only saw inadequacy. Like the work of trying to be better was worth acknowledging even when the results were still messy. They went to bed separately. Chloe was still too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, and they were taking things slow in that regard. But as Adrian lay in his own bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about Ryan 3 rooms away and Chloe in between them, and how this accidental family had become the most important thing in his life. His phone buzzed, a text from Ryan. "Thank you for tonight, for my mom, for wanting us to stay, for all of it." Adrian typed back, "Thank you for taking a chance on someone who had no idea what he was doing. You're doing fine, better than fine. I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up. Then you will, and we'll figure it out together. That's the deal, remember?" Adrian smiled at his phone in the darkness. "Yeah, I remember. Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Ryan." He set his phone down and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 7 years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. The crash came on a Tuesday in October, exactly 8 months after Seattle. Adrian was in back-to-back meetings all morning, the kind of executive theater that accomplished nothing but looked productive on calendars. He just sat down for a late lunch at his desk when his assistant knocked, her expression strained. "Mr. Cole, there's a situation. Ryan's been trying to reach you." Adrian's phone was still on silent from his last meeting. When he checked it, he found 6 missed calls and a text that made his stomach drop. Chloe's school called. She fell on the playground. "They're taking her to Memorial. I'm on my way." He was out of his chair and moving before conscious thought caught up. His assistant called something about his 2 o'clock, but Adrian was already in the elevator, already dialing Ryan. "Where are you?" Adrian demanded when Ryan answered. "Still 10 minutes out. Traffic's a nightmare." Ryan's voice was tight with controlled panic. "They said she hit her head. She's conscious, but they want to run tests. I'm 5 minutes from Memorial. I'll meet you there." "Adrian, you don't have to. I'm already gone." He made it to the hospital in 4 minutes, running 2 red lights and parking in a spot that would definitely earn him a ticket. The ER intake desk directed him to pediatrics, and he found Chloe in an examination room, a young nurse cleaning a cut above her eyebrow while Chloe tried very hard not to cry. "Adrian!" She reached for him, and he was across the room in 2 strides, taking her hand. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here. What happened?" "I was on the monkey bars and I fell and my head hurts and there was so much blood." The words came out in a rush, her composure cracking. "Blood makes everything look scarier than it is," Adrian said, keeping his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "But the nurses are going to fix you up, okay? You're going to be fine." "Where's Daddy?" "On his way. Traffic's slow, but he'll be here soon." The nurse smiled at Adrian. "You must be Dad?" Adrian stopped, unsure how to explain. "I'm with her father. We're together." "Okay. Well, she's doing great, stayed very brave while we cleaned the cut. We're going to do a CT scan just to be safe since she hit her head, but I'm not seeing any signs of serious injury." Chloe squeezed Adrian's hand. "Will the scan hurt?" "No, it's just a big machine that takes pictures of the inside of your head." "Will it see my thoughts?" Despite everything, Adrian almost laughed. "No, just your brain, not what your brain is thinking." "Good. Because I'm thinking some words Daddy says I'm not allowed to say. Your secret's safe with me." Ryan arrived 10 minutes later, breathless and wild-eyed. He took one look at Chloe and his knees nearly buckled. Adrian caught his arm, steadying him. "She's okay?" Adrian said quietly. "Cut above her eyebrow, possible concussion. They're doing a CT scan to be sure, but the nurse thinks she'll be fine." Ryan nodded, then moved to Chloe's side. "Baby, I'm so sorry I wasn't there." "It's okay, Adrian came." "I see that." Ryan met Adrian's eyes over Chloe's head, and the gratitude there was almost overwhelming. The CT scan came back clear. No fracture, no bleeding, just a mild concussion that required rest and monitoring. The doctor gave them discharge instructions and a warning list of symptoms to watch for, and by early evening they were back at the apartment with Chloe installed on the couch, with ice cream and a documentary about deep-sea fish. Ryan collapsed next to Adrian at the kitchen counter, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. "I couldn't get there in time," Ryan said, his voice rough. "I was across town at a client meeting, and by the time I got the call, you were already with her." "That's not a failure, Ryan. That's just logistics. She asked for me, and I wasn't there. But I was. And that's okay, too." Ryan looked at him, something raw in his expression. "You dropped everything. Left work in the middle of the day, no questions asked." "Of course I did. She's Chloe. There was never a question of whether I'd come. Most people wouldn't have. I'm not most people. And she's not just your daughter anymore. She's ours." The word hung between them. Ours. Adrian had said it without thinking, but he meant it. Somewhere in the last 8 months, Chloe had become his in all the ways that mattered. Not biologically, not legally, but in the lived experience of daily life. In showing up for school events and helping with homework and being the person she called when she was scared. "Ours," Ryan repeated softly. "Yeah, she is." That night, after Chloe was asleep and they'd checked on her for the 5th time, Ryan said, "I need to tell you something." Adrian looked up from his laptop where he was catching up on the work he'd abandoned. "Okay. I got a job offer, TechCore Solutions. Senior director position, leading their entire product development division. Significant raise, better benefits, more responsibility. Adrian's chest went cold. When? The offer came last week. I've been sitting on it, trying to figure out what to do. That's a huge opportunity. Yeah, it is. You should take it. Ryan studied him. You say that, but your face says something else. My face is being selfish. TechCore is a good company. That role would be perfect for you. It would also mean leaving Cole Technologies, leaving your company. Our relationship would be simpler if you did. No more HR oversight, no more questions about conflicts of interest. You could advance on your own merit without anyone questioning it. That's all true, but it's not what I asked. Ryan moved closer. Do you want me to stay or go? Adrian's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the counter. I want you to do what's best for your career. Adrian, I want you to stay, Adrian admitted. But that's selfish. You've been stuck in a position you hate because of me. Watching people you train get promoted while you start over. This job would fix all of that. It would, but it would also mean seeing you less. Different schedules, no more running into each other at the office, none of those stolen moments in the hallway when we pretend we're just discussing work. We'd still have evenings, weekends. Would we? Senior director at TechCore means traveling at least twice a month. Late nights, weekend emergencies. It means less time with Chloe, less time with you. Money and career advancement matter too. They do. But so does this, us, what we've built. Ryan took Adrian's shaking hands in his. Tell me what you really want. I want you to be happy. I want your career to matter as much as mine does. I want you to have opportunities that aren't limited by who you're sleeping with. Okay, but underneath all of that, what do you want for us? Adrian closed his eyes. I want you to stay. I want to keep having lunch together in the cafeteria and pretending we're not playing footsie under the table. I want to keep seeing you in the halls and knowing you're close. I want to be selfish and ask you to choose me over career advancement, even though that makes me a terrible person. It doesn't make you terrible. It makes you human. Ryan's thumbs traced circles on Adrian's wrists. Here's what I know. That job pays 30% more than what I make now. The role is everything I've worked toward. And I'm going to turn it down. Adrian's eyes snapped open. What? No, Ryan, you can't. I already did. Called them this morning. Why would you do that? Because I don't want to travel twice a month. I don't want to miss Chloe's soccer games or school plays or the random Tuesday nights when we order pizza and watch documentaries. I don't want to give up what we have for a title and a paycheck. You're going to resent me for this. No, I'm not, because it's my choice, made for my reasons. Ryan pulled Adrian closer. You want to know what changed my mind? Today. Watching you drop everything to be there for Chloe. Seeing how you've become part of our family without even realizing it. That matters more than any job title. What if I can't give you what you need? What if... Stop. You're already giving me what I need. You show up, you try. You're not perfect, but neither am I. And we figure it out together. Ryan's voice softened. I love you, Adrian. I think I have since Seattle, maybe before. And I need you to know that before we go any further. Adrian's breath caught. I love you too. I've been terrified to say it because what if I screw this up? What if the cancer comes back, or I turn into my father, or I damage Chloe somehow by not knowing what I'm doing? Then we deal with it, together. That's what love is. Not the perfect moments, but the messy ones where we choose each other anyway. Adrian kissed him, pouring 8 months of fear and hope and desperate want into it. When they broke apart, he said, I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They stood in the kitchen of what had become their shared home, and Adrian felt something shift. Not fixing, exactly. More like accepting. He would never be the person he was before cancer. Would never be able to have biological children or skip annual cancer screenings or stop his hands from shaking when he was stressed. But maybe he didn't need to be that person. Maybe this version of him, scarred and uncertain and learning how to love anyway, was enough. The conversation about marriage happened 3 months later on a Sunday morning in January. Chloe was at a friend's birthday party, giving Adrian and Ryan a rare few hours alone. They were making breakfast together, Adrian attempting pancakes while Ryan handled the coffee, when Chloe's teacher's words from the previous week surfaced in Adrian's mind. Ms. Patterson asked me if I was Chloe's stepdad, Adrian said, flipping a pancake that was definitely going to burn. What did you say? That the situation was complicated. She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Sounds like you should uncomplicate it." Ryan laughed. I like Ms. Patterson. She also said Chloe's been telling everyone at school that she has 2 dads now. Apparently she's very insistent about it. That sounds like her. Ryan poured coffee into 2 mugs. Does that bother you? Being called her dad? No, it's just... Adrian scraped the burned pancake onto a plate. I'm not legally anything to her. If something happened to you, I'd have no rights. Couldn't make medical decisions. Couldn't keep her if your family contested it. She'd be calling me dad right up until the moment she got taken away. Ryan set down the coffee pot carefully. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I want to make this official, not just between us, but legally. I want to marry you. I want to adopt Chloe. I want there to be no question about where we stand. That's a pretty big step. I know. And if it's too much too fast, we can wait. But I need you to know that's where I'm heading. That this isn't temporary or exploratory for me anymore. You're it. Ryan crossed the kitchen and kissed him, tasting like coffee and hope. Ask me properly. What? You just made a statement. I want an actual question. Adrian laughed, slightly hysterical. I don't have a ring. Don't care. Ask me anyway. So Adrian took Ryan's hands, feeling the steadiness of him, and said, Ryan Blake, will you marry me? Will you let me be Chloe's dad for real? Will you take a chance on someone who's still learning how to be a person instead of just a position? Yes. To all of it, yes. They stood in their kitchen with burned pancakes and cooling coffee, and Adrian felt something slot into place. Purpose, maybe. Or just the simple certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The logistics of planning a wedding while running a company and raising a 7-year-old turned out to be more complicated than Adrian anticipated. He'd imagined something simple, maybe at the courthouse with a few close friends. Ryan had other ideas. Chloe wants to be a flower girl, Ryan announced one evening. Okay? And she wants the wedding to be ocean-themed, because of course she does. Okay. And my sister insists on throwing us an engagement party, and your mother wants to help plan, and I think we've accidentally committed to a whole production instead of the simple thing you probably wanted. Adrian looked up from his laptop. Ryan, I don't care if we get married in an aquarium surrounded by octopuses if that's what makes Chloe happy. The details don't matter, just you and me and making it legal. Even if my sister insists on a slideshow of embarrassing photos? Even then. They settled on a small ceremony in June at a garden venue outside the city. 50 people, mostly family and close friends. Chloe took her role as flower girl with deadly seriousness, practicing her walk down the aisle at least twice a day for the month leading up to the wedding. The adoption paperwork was more complicated. Adrian met with lawyers, filled out forms, submitted to background checks and home studies. Ryan's parents had to consent since they'd been named as guardians in his will, but they did so immediately, welcoming Adrian into the family with a warmth that overwhelmed him. Daniel would have liked you, Ryan's mother said at their engagement party. He'd appreciate that you're good to them both. Adrian didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and hoped she understood. The board had opinions about the marriage, of course. Robert Chen called Adrian into a private meeting 2 days after the engagement announcement. This is permanent then, Robert said. Yes. And you're adopting his daughter. Yes? Robert was quiet for a long moment. I'll be honest, Adrian. When you first disclosed this relationship, I thought it was a mistake, a distraction that would hurt the company. And now? Now I think I was wrong. You're a better leader since Ryan entered your life. More balanced, more present. The numbers support it. Employee satisfaction is up, retention has improved, and you're not burning out your senior staff by example anymore. Adrian hadn't expected that. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep proving me right. Robert's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I'm happy for you. You deserve this. The wedding day arrived faster than Adrian expected. He woke up in a hotel room. Tradition dictated he and Ryan spend the night before apart, and immediately checked his phone for messages. Ryan had sent him a photo at 5 in the morning. Chloe asleep in her flower girl dress, still clutching her practice bouquet. The caption read, "She's been like this since 11 p.m. Refused to take it off." Adrian smiled and sent back, "That's our daughter. Yeah, she is." The ceremony itself was a blur. Adrian remembered walking down the aisle to find Ryan waiting for him, tears already streaming down his face. Remembered Chloe taking her role seriously until halfway down the aisle when she spotted Adrian and broke formation to run to him. Remembered his mother crying and Ryan's sister reading a poem that Daniel had written years ago about love being a choice you make every day. The vows were simple. Adrian had agonized over them for weeks before giving up and speaking from the heart. 7 years ago, I survived something that should have killed me. And for a long time, I thought survival was enough. That building a company and achieving success was the same as living. He looked at Ryan, at this person who'd seen through all his walls. Then you stayed late one night and fixed a memory leak with me, and I started to understand the difference. You taught me that living means showing up even when you're scared. That family isn't about biology. It's about choosing each other every day. That love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. He turned to Chloe, who was standing between them in her ocean blue dress. And you taught me that being a dad doesn't require genetics. It just requires showing up for soccer games and bad dreams and homework about octopuses. You made me want to be better, braver, more than I thought I could be. Back to Ryan. So I'm promising to keep showing up, to choose you both, every day, even when it's hard, to build a life that's messy and real and nothing like the perfect picture I used to think I wanted. Because this, us, is better than anything I could have planned. Ryan's vows were equally simple and about 3 times as emotional. By the time they exchanged rings and kissed and everyone cheered, Adrian felt like his chest might explode from the enormity of it all. At the reception, Chloe dragged him onto the dance floor during the father-daughter dance. She was 7 now, getting taller every day, her grip on his hand strong and sure. "Are you officially my dad now?" she asked. "Not quite. The adoption has to be finalized by a judge, but soon." "Good, because I've been telling everyone at school you are, and I don't want to be a liar." Adrian laughed. "We can't have that. Do I have to call you Dad now, or can I keep calling you Adrian?" "Whatever feels right to you, sweetheart." She thought about it, then said, "I think Adrian feels right, because you were Adrian first, before you were my dad, and I like that better." "Then Adrian it is." They danced while Ryan watched from the edge of the floor, his expression soft with contentment. Adrian caught his eye and mouthed, "I love you," and Ryan mouthed it back. And Adrian thought about how far they'd both come from that first night in the development lab. The adoption was finalized in August, 2 months after the wedding. Adrian took the day off work for the court hearing, something he never would have done before Ryan and Chloe entered his life. The judge was matter-of-fact but kind, asking Chloe if she understood what adoption meant. "It means Adrian's my dad for real now," Chloe said confidently, "even legally." "That's right, and is that what you want?" "Yes, because he shows up for me even when he's scared, and that's what dads do." The judge smiled. "That's a very good definition." She signed the papers, and just like that, Adrian Cole became Adrian Cole Blake, legal father to Chloe Blake, married to Ryan Blake. A family in every sense that mattered. That night, they celebrated with takeout and ice cream because Chloe insisted that all major life events required ice cream. They sat in their living room, not Adrian's living room or Ryan's, but theirs, and Chloe showed Adrian her new school binder where she'd written Chloe Blake in careful letters, followed by dads, Ryan, and Adrian. "Did you know that seahorse dads carry the babies?" Chloe informed him. "The mom gives him the eggs and he keeps them in his pouch until they hatch." I did know that, actually." "So you're like a seahorse dad. You didn't make me, but you're taking care of me anyway." Adrian's throat went tight. "Yeah, I guess I am." "That's really cool. Most people think dads have to be the ones who make the babies, but that's not true. Dads are just the people who stay." She said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, like she'd figured out a truth that Adrian had spent years struggling with. And maybe she had. Maybe it really was that simple. Ryan found Adrian later that night, standing at their bedroom window looking out at the city. The same view he'd had for years, but everything looked different now. "You okay?" Ryan asked, wrapping his arms around Adrian from behind. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how I spent 7 years convinced that surviving was enough. That building something successful meant I'd done what I was supposed to do with the life I'd been given. Adrian leaned back into Ryan's warmth. I was wrong. This is what I was supposed to do. You and Chloe. This family we built. We built it together. Yeah, we did. Adrian turned to face him. I need to tell you something. Okay. I'm stepping down as CEO. Ryan went very still. What? I've been thinking about it for a while. The board's been pushing me to name a successor anyway, and I realized I don't want to be CEO for the next 20 years. I want to be present for Chloe's childhood. I want to travel with you. I want to have time for the things that matter instead of spending 70 hours a week proving something I already proved. Adrian, that company is your legacy. No, you and Chloe are my legacy. The company is just something I built. Adrian took Ryan's hands. I'm not abandoning it. I'll stay on the board, maybe do some consulting, but I'm done being married to my work. I want to be married to you instead. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, When? Officially, 6 months. That gives me time to transition, make sure the company is stable. But I already talked to the board last week. They're supporting it. Who's taking over? Margaret Chen. She's been unofficially running things for years anyway. She'll be good at it. Better than I am, probably. And you're sure about this? I'm sure. Adrian pulled Ryan closer. I spent 7 years building a company because I thought that's what survivors were supposed to do. Make something matter. Leave a mark. But you know what actually matters? Being there when Chloe loses her next tooth. Having time to make breakfast with you on Sundays. Not missing life because I'm too busy proving I'm alive. Ryan kissed him, slow and deep. Okay, then let's do it. The transition took exactly 6 months as planned. Adrian spent December training Margaret, transferring knowledge, making sure every system was documented. By the time the official handover happened in January, he felt ready, more than ready. His last day as CEO, he cleaned out his office on the 42nd floor. The space he'd occupied for 8 years, the view he'd stared at during countless late nights. It should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like freedom. Ryan met him in the lobby, Chloe bouncing at his side. She was 8 now, missing her 2 front teeth, still obsessed with marine biology, but now also interested in robotics. Ready to go? Ryan asked. Adrian looked back at the building one last time, Cole Technologies. His creation, his proof that he'd survived and thrived. It would keep running without him. That was the point. Yeah, Adrian said, I'm ready. They walked out into the January afternoon, Chloe chattering about her robotics project while Ryan held Adrian's hand. The same hand that shook when Adrian was stressed, that bore the scars of IV lines and nerve damage that Ryan had taken anyway and refused to let go of. Adrian had thought for years that his scars were marks of what he'd lost. Fertility, certainty, the future he'd planned before cancer rewrote everything. But looking at his family, Ryan patient and solid beside him, Chloe skipping ahead with absolute confidence that they'd follow, Adrian realized the scars were something different. They were a map, a path from who he'd been to who he'd become, from isolated and afraid to connected and present, from surviving to actually living. 2 years later, Adrian stood in an aquarium in California, watching Chloe press her face against the glass of the octopus exhibit. She was 10 now, all legs and enthusiasm, explaining to a group of younger kids how octopuses could squeeze through any opening larger than their beak. Ryan stood beside him, gray just starting to show at his temples, laugh lines deeper than they'd been 3 years ago. They'd spent the last 6 months planning this trip, saving up vacation days and coordinating with Chloe's school schedule. She's going to be a marine biologist, Ryan said. You know that, right? Or a robotics engineer. She keeps changing her mind. Either way, she's going to change the world. Yeah, she is. Adrian's phone buzzed, a text from his mother. How's the trip? Tell Chloe I expect a full report on all the sea creatures. He typed back. Trip's great. Chloe's in heaven. Talk soon. Patricia had become a regular part of their lives, showing up for school events and Sunday dinners, and generally being the grandmother Chloe had been missing. She and Ryan got along like a house on fire, occasionally teaming up to tease Adrian about his continued stress-baking habit. We should do this every year, Chloe announced, appearing at their side.
Come here. See the octopuses. Spend a whole week just looking at ocean stuff. That's a lot of ocean stuff, Ryan said. So?
Ocean stuff is the best stuff. Hard to argue with that logic, Adrian agreed. That night, after Chloe was asleep in the hotel room, Adrian and Ryan sat on the balcony overlooking the water. The Pacific stretched out before them, dark and infinite, and Adrian thought about how far he'd come from that first night when Ryan had stayed late to fix a memory leak. "Do you regret it?" Ryan asked quietly. "Giving up the company?" "Not even a little bit." Adrian took Ryan's hand, the gesture automatic now after 3 years of marriage. "I got to be there when Chloe won her robotics competition. I got to take this trip without checking email every 5 minutes. I got to be present instead of perpetually absent. That's worth more than any board meeting." "You're happy?" It wasn't a question, but Adrian answered anyway. "Yeah, I really am." And he was. Not perfectly, not without the occasional anxiety attack, or the nights when the old fears crept back in, but happy in the way that mattered, in the lived experience of building a life with people who saw him completely and loved him anyway. The cancer had tried to take everything, had taken his fertility and his certainty and the comfortable future he'd imagined, but in the empty space it left behind, Adrian had built something better. A family not bound by biology, but by choice. A love not based on perfection, but on showing up. A life not defined by what he'd lost, but by what he'd found. His scars had become a map, and the map had led him here. To this moment, on this balcony, with his husband beside him and his daughter sleeping safely inside. To a future he'd never imagined, but couldn't imagine living without. Adrian Cole had spent 7 years surviving, but now, finally, he was living, and that made all the difference.